Ruthie McLaren stood in the Cedar Falls General Store with her last $3 clutched in one hand and a job notice nobody else would touch in the other. The paper promised good wages, room and board, no questions asked, which should have been a blessing for a woman with her kind of past. But the rancher offering it was Wade Langston, the man whose grief had turned so cold it froze out every housekeeper, cook, and companion who tried to reach him in the 3 years since his wife and son died. Ruthie didn't take the job because she was brave. She took it because she'd run out of places to run. Welcome to a story about second chances in the hardest place to find them, the heart of a broken man. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far Ruthie's journey travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will change everything. The stage rattled into Cedar Falls on a Tuesday afternoon, trailing dust and the kind of exhaustion that settles into bones after 4 days of hard travel. Ruthie stepped down onto packed earth, her worn carpet bag hanging heavy in one hand, and took in the town with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to measure welcome before crossing thresholds. Cedar Falls wasn't much. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple reaching toward endless Texas sky, corrals and watering troughs marking the spaces between commerce and survival. But it had what she needed, distance from everything she was leaving behind, and a job that nobody else wanted badly enough to take. The general store smelled like coffee, leather, and the particular mustiness of fabric that had sat too long on shelves. Behind the counter, a thin man with spectacles and careful hands watched her approach. "Help you, miss?" Ruthie set her bag down and pulled the crumpled notice from her pocket, smoothing it against the counter. "This job still available?" The storekeeper's expression shifted, surprise, then something closer to concern. "Blackbriar Ranch? That's Wade Langston's place." "The notice says housekeeper and cook. Good wages, room and board." She kept her voice steady. "Doesn't say anything about the employer's temperament." "No, ma'am, it doesn't." He glanced toward the window, as if the ranch itself might be visible beyond the buildings. "But I'd be remiss not to mention that you'd be the 7th to try in 3 years. Longest anyone's lasted is 4 weeks. "What happened to them?" The storekeeper shook his head. "Nothing happened to them exactly. It's just, well, Wade Langston isn't the man he used to be. Lost his wife and boy to fever 3 years back. House went dark after that. He keeps to himself. Barely speaks. Doesn't want company or comfort, or anything resembling human contact. Women who've worked there say it's like living with a ghost." Ruthie had lived with worse than ghosts. "How do I get there?" He studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-stained dress, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself like someone braced for disappointment. Whatever he saw made him sigh and reach under the counter for paper and pencil. 5 miles north, where the road forks at the lightning-struck oak. Bear right, follow the creek for another 2 miles. You'll see the gate. He paused. "Wade comes to town for supplies every Saturday. You could wait, introduce yourself proper." "I'd rather not wait." She picked up her bag. "Thank you for the directions." "Miss?" he called after her as she reached the door. "Wade Langston's not a bad man. He's just buried under grief so heavy he can't see daylight anymore. If you go out there expecting to fix him, you'll be disappointed. And if you go expecting kindness, you'll be disappointed harder." Ruthie turned back, and for the first time she let him see the steel beneath her worn-out exterior. "I'm not expecting anything except a roof and wages. Everything else is between Mr. Langston and whatever he's carrying." The walk to Blackbriar Ranch took most of the afternoon. The road wound through rolling grassland, past scattered homesteads and grazing cattle, under a sky so wide and blue it made her chest ache. This was different country than she'd known, harder, drier, less forgiving. But there was honesty in it. The land didn't pretend to be anything except what it was. She found the lightning-struck oak, bare branches reaching like broken fingers toward clouds. Took the right fork, followed a creek that ran clear over smooth stones, bordered by cottonwoods that whispered in wind she couldn't quite feel. And then as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she saw the gate. Black iron, tall and imposing, with Blackbriar Ranch worked into the metalwork in letters that had once been grand, but now showed rust at the edges. Beyond it, a road led through grassland toward buildings that resolved themselves into distinct shapes as she walked, barns, corrals, outbuildings, and at the center of it all, a house. Not a ranch house, a mansion. 2 stories of whitewashed wood and stone with wide porches wrapping around 3 sides, tall windows that reflected dying sunlight, and architectural details that spoke of money and ambition and dreams of building something permanent. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it crouched in the landscape like something wounded, windows dark, curtains drawn, surrounded by land that looked tended but joyless. Ruthie stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly aware of how small she was against all this. One worn-out woman with a carpet bag, facing down a monument to grief. She climbed the steps, knocked. Nothing. She knocked harder, the sound echoing across empty spaces. Still nothing. "Mr. Langston?" Her voice sounded thin against the wind. "My name is Ruthie McLaren. I'm here about the housekeeper position." Silence answered. She tried the door, unlocked. It swung inward on hinges that needed oil, revealing a front hall that stole her breath. Dust motes swam in slanted light from windows that clearly hadn't been opened in months. The air tasted stale, heavy with the particular sadness of spaces meant for living that had become tombs. To her left, a grand staircase swept upward, its banister dull with neglect. To her right, rooms opened into shadows, a parlor, a dining room, spaces filled with furniture draped in white sheets like corpses. "Mr. Langston." A sound from deeper in the house, boot heels on wood. She followed it through the hall, past rooms that whispered of better days, until she reached what must be the kitchen. The man standing at the sink had his back to her, shoulders rigid, every line of his body radiating isolation. He was tall, broad through the chest and shoulders in the way of men who worked hard for their living. Dark hair touched with gray, though she guessed he couldn't be more than 35. His hands gripped the edge of the sink like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Door was open," Ruthie said quietly. "I knocked, but I heard you." His voice was rough, unused. "You're the new housekeeper." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "If you'll have me." "Don't care enough not to." He still hadn't turned around. $20 a month, room upstairs, second door on the left. You cook, clean, stay out of locked rooms, and don't ask questions I won't answer. Those are the terms. $20 was twice what the notice had promised. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt the weight of what those terms actually meant. He was paying premium wages to be left alone in his own house. Those terms are acceptable. Good. He reached for a bottle on the counter, whiskey, mostly empty. "You can start tomorrow. Today's almost over." Ruthie watched him pour 3 fingers into a glass, watched his hand shake just slightly as he raised it to his lips. In the fading light from the window, she could see his reflection in the glass above the sink, hard features, hollow eyes, the face of a man who'd stopped caring whether he lived or died somewhere around the same time he stopped sleeping. She recognized that face, had seen versions of it in every mirror she'd looked into for the past 2 years. "Mr. Langston," she said, keeping her voice even. "When did you last eat a real meal?" His shoulders went rigid. "That's a question." "No, sir, it's an observation. You're paying me to cook, which suggests you need someone to cook for you. But this kitchen hasn't seen use in so long, the stove's gone cold, and there's mouse droppings in the flour bin." He turned then, finally, and she got her first clear look at Wade Langston. The storekeeper had been wrong. This wasn't a man buried under grief. This was a man who'd crawled into his grave and was waiting, with terrible patience, for the dirt to cover him. "Miss McLaren." He said her name like it tasted of nothing. "I appreciate you traveling all this way, but I'm going to be honest with you now so we don't waste each other's time. I don't need someone to take care of me. I don't need company, conversation, or charity. What I need is for this house to maintain a minimum appearance of function so the county doesn't send some well-meaning committee to check on my welfare. You do that, take your wages, and live your life. I'll live what's left of mine. We'll get along fine." "And if I can't do that?" The words were out before she could stop them. "If I can't watch a man starve himself while pretending to eat?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those hollow eyes. "Then you'll leave, just like all the others." They stood there in the dying light, 2 people who'd arrived at the same place from different directions. the end of roads, the bottom of choices, the space where you either surrender or find one more reason to take the next breath. Ruthie set her carpet bag down. I'd like to start tonight, if it's all the same to you. That stove needs cleaning before it'll hold heat, and there's meal planning to do if I'm going to feed 2 people proper. Do what you want. He picked up his glass and the bottle. I'll be in my study. Don't disturb me. He walked out, boot heels echoing through empty rooms, leaving Ruthie alone in a kitchen that hadn't known warmth in 3 years. She stood there for a moment, listening to the house settle around her, feeling the weight of silence and loss pressing down from every corner. Then she rolled up her sleeves, found matches and kindling, and set about bringing fire back to cold iron. The stove fought her. Of course it did. Everything in this house had been still for so long it had forgotten how to move. But Ruthie had learned patience in hard schools, so she scraped and scrubbed and coaxed until the fire caught, until heat began to radiate into the cold kitchen, until the smell of burning wood pushed back against the staleness. She found flour that wasn't completely overrun, salt, lard that had gone only slightly rancid. No eggs, no milk, no vegetables. But she could make biscuits. Simple, plain, the kind of food that said someone is taking care of things without demanding gratitude. While Doe rested, she explored. The dining room held a table that could seat 12, set with fine china under dust thick enough to write in. The parlor contained furniture that spoke of money and taste. Settees, wingback chairs, a piano in the corner with keys gone yellow. Family portraits lined one wall, a younger Wade with softer eyes, a beautiful woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, a little boy with his father's features and his mother's warmth, the family that used to live here before fever stole breath and broke hearts. Ruthie didn't linger. Grief deserved privacy. Upstairs, she found her room small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking darkening grassland. She found other bedrooms, all closed. And at the end of the hall, a door with a lock that gleamed newer than the rest, as if it had been installed recently to keep something in, or someone out. She didn't touch it. Wade had said locked rooms were off limits, and she'd agreed to those terms. The biscuits came out golden just as full dark settled over the ranch. Ruthie arranged 6 on a plate, poured water from the pump into a clean glass, and carried both through the silent house to the study. The door was ajar. Inside, Wade sat in a leather chair by a cold fireplace, the whiskey bottle on the table beside him, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Brought you supper," Ruthie said from the doorway. "Not hungry." "Didn't ask if you were." She stepped inside, set the plate and glass on the table within his reach. "Just saying it's here if you change your mind." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Why?" "Why what, Mr. Langston? Why take a job nobody else wants, in a house where you're not welcome, for a man who's made it clear he doesn't want you here?" He still wasn't looking at her. "You running from something?" The question hit closer than he could know. Ruthie kept her voice steady. "We're all running from something, sir. Question is whether we're running towards something better or just running until we can't anymore." "And which are you doing?" She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who'd built a mansion for love and turned it into a mausoleum when love died, who paid premium wages to guarantee loneliness, who held on to pain so tightly he'd forgotten how to hold anything else. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I figure I'll work that out while I'm here." She left him with the biscuits and the silence. 3 days passed. Ruthie established routines the way you'd lay foundation stones, carefully, deliberately, one piece at a time. She rose before dawn, started the kitchen fire, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She cleaned methodically, opening windows to let in air and light, beating dust from curtains, scrubbing floors until they gleamed. She cooked meals Wade didn't eat, but she left anyway. Breakfast on the kitchen table, lunch on the study desk, dinner by his chair in the parlor. He moved through the house like a shadow, avoiding her without actually leaving. She'd hear his footsteps in the hall late at night, or catch glimpses of him standing at windows, staring out at land he no longer seemed to see. The biscuits disappeared. So did the coffee. Whether he ate them or threw them out, she didn't know and didn't ask. On the 4th morning, she woke to find him in the kitchen before dawn, standing at the stove with his hand on the coffee pot she'd left warming. "Morning, Mr. Langston," she said quietly, not wanting to startle him. He poured coffee into a tin cup, added nothing, drank it black. House looks different. Clean things usually do. The corner of his mouth might have twitched, or it might have been the shadows. You planning to stay then? Planning to earn my wages, sir. How long I stay depends on whether I'm actually useful or just in your way. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw intelligence in those hollow eyes, the kind that had been sleeping but wasn't dead. You don't talk like a housekeeper. Don't know how housekeepers are supposed to talk. I just talk like myself. Where are you from? East, Philadelphia originally, but I've moved around. Family? Not anymore. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. That why you took a job in the middle of nowhere, working for a man with a reputation for driving off help? Ruthie poured her own coffee, giving herself time to choose words carefully. I took this job because I needed work and you needed help. Everything else is just details. Details matter. Sometimes. Sometimes they're just excuses we use to avoid what's right in front of us. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. Wade drank his coffee, watching her with the wariness of something wild that hadn't yet decided whether to bolt or bite. I'll be riding fence lines today, he said finally. Won't be back till dark. I'll leave supper. Don't have to. Didn't say I had to, said I would. He almost smiled. She was sure of it this time, a flicker of something almost human crossing his face before the shutters came down again. You're stubborn. Yes, sir, I am. He left with the sunrise, and Ruthie watched from the kitchen window as he saddled a big bay gelding and rode out across grassland that rolled away toward horizons she couldn't see. Then she turned back to the house and the work it needed. By mid-morning, she'd scrubbed the dining room table and polished the chandelier until crystal caught light. By noon, she'd beaten every rug in the downstairs and hung them to air. By afternoon, she'd made her way to the second floor, working room by room, until she reached the end of the hall. The locked door. She stood there, dust rag in hand, looking at that newer lock and the shadows underneath. Behind it, she could hear wind moving through spaces that shouldn't be accessible, which meant a window was open, or broken, letting weather into whatever Wade had sealed away. It wasn't her business. She'd agreed not to ask questions, not to disturb locked rooms. But wind meant damage, and damage meant waste, and Ruthie had been poor too long to stomach waste. She tried the handle. Locked, as expected. But locks could be picked if you had the right tools and the wrong set of morals, and Ruthie had both. She retrieved a hairpin from her room, worked the mechanism with the patience of someone who'd learned to open doors that weren't meant for her, and felt the lock give. The door swung open on a child's bedroom. Ruthie's breath caught. It was perfect, untouched, a room frozen in time like something under glass, a small bed with quilts patterned in stars, toy soldiers arranged on a shelf, books stacked neatly on a desk, drawings pinned to walls, childish sketches of horses and houses and stick figure families, and by the window, a rocking chair with a woman's shawl draped across it, as if she'd just set it down and would return any moment to pick it up again. The window was cracked, just enough to let wind through, just enough to make the shawl flutter like something breathing. Ruthie stepped inside, feeling like an intruder in a shrine. Dust lay thick here too, but carefully, as if Wade had locked the door to preserve this space exactly as it was, but couldn't bear to come in and tend it himself. She moved to the window, intending to close it, and that's when she saw the small wooden horse on the sill. Hand-carved, smooth with handling, one ear slightly chipped. The kind of toy a father might make for a son, working by lamplight after long days, putting love into every cut and curve. She picked it up, felt the weight of it, the care in it, and something broke open in her chest. "What are you doing in here?" Wade's voice cracked like a whip. Ruthie spun, still holding the horse, and found him in the doorway with fury and anguish written across every line of his body. "The window was open," she said quietly. "I heard wind. Thought there might be damage. Get out." "Mr. Langston, get out!" His voice shook. "This room is locked for a reason. You had no right." "You're right." She set the horse back carefully, exactly where she'd found it. "I had no right. I apologize." She moved toward the door, but he blocked it, breathing hard, and she realized he wasn't angry at her. He was terrified of this room, of what it held, of what remembering might do to the careful numbness he'd built around himself. Mr. Langston, Ruthie said gently. What was his name? Don't. Your son. What was his name? I said don't. And your wife. She kept her voice steady, kept her eyes on his. What was her name? Because they lived here, they were loved here, and pretending they didn't exist doesn't honor them. It just makes them disappear twice. Wade's face went white. For a moment she thought he might hit her, or collapse, or both. But he did neither. Instead he said, in a voice scraped raw, Thomas. His name was Thomas. She was Ellen. And they died together, in fever, while I was away buying cattle that don't matter anymore. I came home to graves and silence and a house that still smelled like sickness. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. He looked past her, into the room, at the life that used to fill it. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't change anything. No, sir, it doesn't. But sealing this room like a tomb doesn't bring them back either. It just means you're burying yourself alongside them. His eyes snapped back to her, sharp with pain. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Ruthie met his gaze without flinching. I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. I know what it's like to wake up and wonder why you're still breathing when the people you love aren't. And I know what it's like to decide that feeling nothing is easier than feeling everything, so you lock away pieces of yourself until there's nothing left but routine and silence. Then you know why I don't open this door. I do, but I also know that 3 years is a long time to live like a ghost in your own house, and at some point you have to decide whether you're going to keep dying or start living again. Wade stared at her, chest heaving, and she could see the war in him, between the safety of numbness and the terror of feeling, between the grave he'd dug for himself and the daylight he'd abandoned. You should go, he said finally, his voice hollow. Take your wages for the week and go. I don't want. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Langston. Why not? Why stay here, with me? Ruthie looked at the room behind him, at the evidence of love carefully preserved and desperately avoided. Then she looked at Wade and spoke truth she hadn't planned to share. Because I understand what it costs to survive when the people who gave your life meaning are gone. And I understand that sometimes the only way through grief is to have someone stand witness to it. Someone who won't try to fix you or save you or make it better, but who'll just stay while you figure out how to be a person again. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither could quite say. Then Wade stepped back from the doorway. Close the window before you leave the room. Yes, sir. And lock the door when you're done. Yes, sir. He walked away, footsteps echoing through the hall, and Ruthie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then she turned back to Thomas's room, closed the window against the wind, and stood for a long moment looking at the small wooden horse on the sill. A father had made that for his son. A wife had sat in that rocking chair. A family had lived and loved in this house, and death had stolen it all. But Ruthie had learned something essential in her own journey through loss. The only thing worse than grief was forgetting what you were grieving for. She locked the door behind her when she left, but she didn't return the key to Wade. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket, where it rested like a promise against her hip. That night, she made chicken and dumplings. Simple food, the kind that required sitting at a table with a bowl and a spoon, the kind that couldn't be eaten while standing or walking or avoiding. She set 2 places in the kitchen, poured water into glasses, and waited. Wade came in after dark, covered in trail dust, moving like a man who'd ridden hard and thought harder. He stopped when he saw the table. What's this? Supper. Figured we could both use a proper meal. I don't eat at tables anymore. Then tonight you'll make an exception. Ruthie pulled out a chair. Please, Mr. Langston, it's been a long day for both of us, and food's better warm. He stood there, caught between resistance and surrender, and she could see him measuring costs. Finally, slowly, he sat. They ate in silence at first, just the sound of spoons on china, the subtle shift of bodies in chairs. But it wasn't the terrible silence of isolation. It was the quieter silence of people sharing space without demanding words. Halfway through the meal, Wade said, "You were right." Ruthie looked up. About the room. About locking things away. He stared at his bowl. I thought if I didn't look at it, didn't touch anything, it would hurt less. But it doesn't. It just means I carry it everywhere instead of keeping it in one place. Grief doesn't get smaller when you ignore it. It just gets louder. Is that what happened to you? Your people, did they die? Ruthie set her spoon down carefully. My husband died. Accident at a factory where he worked. Left me with debts I couldn't pay and a reputation I couldn't shake when I tried to keep his business running. Lost the shop, lost the house, lost everything that tied me to who I used to be. And now? Now I'm here, starting over, one day at a time. Wade nodded slowly. Thomas liked dumplings. Ellen used to make them on Sundays. It was the first time he'd said their names without being forced. The first time he'd offered memory instead of silence. She was a good cook? Better than good? Better than me at most things. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. She could make a house feel like home just by walking through it. Everything was warmer when she was near. Tell me about Thomas. And Wade did. Haltingly at first, then with gathering momentum. Stories about a boy who loved horses, who followed his father around the ranch asking endless questions, who drew pictures of the family on every scrap of paper he could find. A boy who'd been 4 years old when fever took him, too young to understand death, young enough to die still believing his papa would make everything better. Ruthie listened and didn't interrupt, and let him talk until the words ran dry. When silence returned, it was different, softer, less sharp with edges that cut. Thank you, Wade said quietly, for not leaving when I told you to. Thank you for letting me stay. He stood, gathered his bowl and hers, carried them to the sink. I'll be up before dawn tomorrow, riding out to check the north pasture. I'll have coffee ready. Ruthie? He turned and she saw that he was using her given name for the first time. That key you took from the nursery door, keep it. I'm not ready to go in there yet, but I don't want it locked against me forever either. She nodded. I'll keep it safe. He left her there in the kitchen, but his footsteps didn't sound so much like a ghost's anymore. Ruthie washed the dishes, banked the fire, and climbed the stairs to her small room as the house settled into night around her. Through her window, she could see the vast Texas sky, thick with stars that seemed close enough to touch. She'd come to Blackbriar Ranch expecting nothing more than wages and a roof. But standing there in the darkness, with the key to a locked nursery in her pocket and the memory of Wade's voice speaking his family's names, Ruthie understood she'd stumbled into something more complicated than simple employment. She'd stumbled into the slow, painful work of helping a dead man remember how to live. And against all wisdom, against every survival instinct she'd honed through her own losses, she found herself willing to stay for it. For him. For the house that deserved to breathe again. For the family whose memory deserved better than sealed doors and silence. Outside, wind moved through grass like whispered conversations. Inside, the house that had felt like a tomb for 3 years began, almost imperceptibly, to warm. The change in Wade Langston didn't come like sunrise, sudden and obvious. It came like spring in hard country, slowly, grudgingly, with setbacks that made you wonder if winter would ever truly end. But it came. 2 weeks after Ruthie opened the nursery door, Wade started eating breakfast at the kitchen table instead of taking coffee to his study. He didn't say much, just sat across from her while morning light slanted through windows she'd scrubbed clean, working through eggs and biscuits with the mechanical efficiency of a man relearning basic human functions. But he was there, occupying space, breathing the same air, and that was something. 3 weeks in, she found him standing in the parlor at dusk, running his hand along the piano keys without pressing them, lost in some memory she couldn't see. Did Ellen play? Ruthie asked from the doorway. Wade's hand stilled. Every evening, Thomas would sit right there. He nodded toward a small footstool, and she'd play whatever he asked for, usually the same 3 songs over and over until I knew them by heart. Do you remember them? Every note. His voice went rough. Sometimes I hear them in my sleep and wake up thinking she's downstairs, that it was all a nightmare. Then I remember. Ruthie crossed to the piano, lifted the cover from the keys. Dust had settled into the cracks, turning ivory yellow-gray. Might help to hear the music again, real music, not just memory. I don't play. I do, a little. My mother taught me before she died. Wade looked at her with something approaching curiosity. You're full of surprises, Miss McLaren. Life's too short to be predictable, Mr. Langston. She sat on the bench, tested a few keys. They were out of tune but functional. What were the songs Thomas liked? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, Beautiful Dreamer, Camptown Races, and some lullaby Ellen's mother used to sing. I never knew the name. Ruthie's fingers found the opening notes of Beautiful Dreamer, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. The melody filled the room, sweet and melancholy, and she felt Wade go absolutely still behind her. She played it through once, let the final notes fade into silence, then turned to find him gripping the back of a chair hard enough to make his knuckles white. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have... No. His voice was strangled. No, it's... He stopped, swallowed hard. It's good to hear it again. Hurts like hell, but it's good. Want me to stop? He shook his head slowly. Play the others, please. So she did, working through the simple tunes that had once filled this house with joy, and Wade stood there taking it like medicine, painful but necessary. When she finished, he didn't speak, just walked out into the gathering darkness, and she heard the front door close behind him. She found him an hour later, sitting on the porch steps with his face turned towards stars that burned cold and distant overhead. Mr. Langston, Wade, he didn't look at her. If you're going to drag me back to the land of the living, you might as well use my given name. Ruthie settled on the step beside him, careful to leave space between them. Wade, then, and you should call me Ruthie. Ruthie. He tested the name like he was tasting something he'd forgotten the flavor of. It suits you better than Miss McLaren. Too formal for someone who picks locks and plays dead women's favorite songs. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. He tilted his head back, looking up at the vast sweep of sky. That's what makes it worse somehow. You're not trying to fix me or save me. You're just here, being kind without asking for anything in return. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it be. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to night sounds, cattle lowing in distant pastures, wind in grass, the creek murmuring over stones. Finally, Wade said, I used to carve. Wood. Little things mostly, toys for Thomas, boxes for Ellen, fence posts with decorative tops. Haven't touched my tools in 3 years. Why not? Same reason I locked the nursery. Felt like if I kept doing things I used to do when they were alive, I was pretending they never died. Like I was betraying their memory by continuing to exist. Ruthie chose her words carefully. I think they'd want you to exist. To live, not just survive. You didn't know them? No. But I know what it's like to love someone enough that losing them breaks everything you thought you were. And I know that the people we love don't want us to bury ourselves with them. They want us to carry them forward, honor them by becoming more than our grief. Wade turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in starlight. How long has it been since you lost your husband? 2 years? 3 months? 17 days? The precision of it embarrassed her. I stopped counting weeks ago, but the numbers stuck. Does it get easier? No, but you get stronger, learn to carry the weight better. He nodded slowly, then stood and offered her his hand, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cool night air. She let him pull her to her feet. Thank you, he said simply, for staying, for not giving up on a lost cause. You're not a lost cause, Wade Langston. You're just a man who forgot how to hope. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Maybe you're right. Maybe I did forget. He released her hand, stepped back. I'll see you at breakfast. I'll have coffee ready. She watched him go inside, then stood alone on the porch for a few minutes more, listening to the night and wondering what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. She'd taken a job, nothing more. But somehow, without meaning to, she'd become invested in Wade's healing, and that was dangerous territory for a woman with her own wounds still raw. The next morning, she woke to sounds from below. Wood scraping, metal clinking, the distinctive rhythm of work being done. She dressed quickly and descended to find Wade in the dining room, removing dust covers from furniture with methodical precision. Figured it was time, he said without preamble. House has been a tomb long enough. Ruthie moved to help him, folding white sheets that had protected beauty from use. Beneath them, furniture emerged like treasures uncovered, cherrywood gleaming, upholstery still rich despite years of darkness, the table stretching long and elegant down the room's center. Ellen picked most of this, Wade said, running his hand along a chair back. She had an eye for quality, said if we were building something permanent, it should be beautiful. She was right. They worked together in companionable silence, transforming the room from shrouded to alive. When they finished, sunlight streaming through cleaned windows made everything glow amber gold, and Wade stood looking at it with an expression Ruthie couldn't quite read. "Looks like a place people could live in again," he said finally. "It does." "Ruthie." He turned to face her. "I want to show you something. Out in the barn." She followed him across the yard to a structure that loomed red and solid against blue sky. Inside it smelled of hay and leather and animals, good smells, honest smells. Wade led her past stalls where horses watched with dark, intelligent eyes to a corner workshop she hadn't noticed before. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in fine sawdust and scattered tools. Pieces of wood in various stages of completion sat waiting, a half-finished chair leg, a box with intricate joinery, several small carved animals frozen mid-creation. "I stopped mid-project when Ellen and Thomas died," Wade said, touching a partially carved horse. "Left everything exactly as it was, like I might come back the next day and finish. But I never did." Ruthie picked up a tiny wooden rabbit, smooth under her fingers despite being incomplete. "You have real skill." "Had," he corrected quietly. "Haven't held a chisel in so long I've probably forgotten how." "Skill doesn't disappear just because you stop using it. It waits." Wade studied the workshop with the expression of a man standing on a threshold he wasn't sure he could cross. "Thomas used to sit right there on that stool and hand me tools. He'd talk the whole time, questions, stories, observations about everything under the sun. Kid never stopped thinking, never stopped wondering." His voice cracked slightly. "I used to get impatient sometimes, wish for quiet so I could concentrate. Now I'd give anything to hear him chatter one more time." "What would you make if you started again?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I don't know. Haven't thought that far. Maybe that's where you start. Thinking about it." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You believe I can do this? Come back from where I've been?" "I know you can. Question is whether you believe it." Before Wade could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. They emerged from the barn to see a rider coming up the long road from the gate. A man on a big sorrel horse, moving with the easy confidence of someone who owned whatever ground he crossed. Wade's entire body went rigid. Hell. Who is it? Trouble. Wade stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Ruthie in a protective gesture she didn't think he was conscious of. "His name's Silas Morton. We served together in the war, same regiment, different philosophies about what honor meant. Haven't seen him in years." The rider pulled up in the yard and Ruthie got her first clear look at Silas Morton. He was handsome in a polished way that made Wade's rough-hewn features seem more honest by comparison. Well-dressed, well-groomed, with cold eyes that assessed everything like he was calculating its worth. "Wade Langston." Morton's voice was smooth, practiced. "Heard you were still out here, hiding from civilization." "Not hiding, living." Wade's tone was flat. "What do you want, Silas?" Morton dismounted with theatrical grace, tied his horse to the rail. "Can an old friend visit without wanting something?" "We're not friends. Never were." "Now that's harsh." Morton's gaze slid to Ruthie, lingered in a way that made her skin crawl. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" "Miss McLaren is my housekeeper. That's all you need to know." Housekeeper. Morton smiled like he'd tasted something sweet. "Heard you were going through them faster than feed corn. This one looks like she might have staying power." Ruthie kept her expression neutral, but every instinct she'd honed through hard experience was screaming warnings. This man was dangerous, not in the obvious way of violence, but in the quieter, more insidious way of people who destroyed things because they could. "State your business or ride out," Wade said evenly. "I've got work to do." Morton pulled folded papers from his coat. Actually, I'm here on business. Been buying up property in the county, the Henderson place, the Morrison spread, couple smaller homesteads, building something bigger than any one ranch, an empire. Good for you. Not interested. You haven't heard my offer yet. Don't need to. This land stays in my family. Morton's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Your family, Wade? From where I'm standing, you don't have a family anymore. Just empty rooms and memories. He gestured at the house. Place like this needs children, life, purpose. What are you holding on to it for? Wade's hands clenched into fists, and Ruthie saw the rage building in him, deep, hot, barely controlled. She stepped forward before he could say something that couldn't be unsaid. Mr. Morton, she said crisply, Mr. Langston has made his position clear. Perhaps you should respect it. Morton's attention snapped to her, reassessing. Well now, housekeeper with opinions, how refreshing. Ruthie, go inside, Wade said quietly. I don't think... Please. She heard the edge in his voice, recognized it as the sound of a man trying very hard not to explode. Reluctantly, she walked toward the house, but stopped on the porch where she could still hear. Same Wade as always, Morton was saying, thinking you can lock yourself away and the world will leave you alone. But things are changing out here. Small operations can't compete anymore. You're sitting on prime grazing land, good water, proximity to rail lines. In the right hands, this place could be worth 10 times what you're doing with it. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Name yours. There is no price. Wade's voice was deadly quiet. My wife built this house. My son played in these yards. Their graves are on that hill beyond the north pasture. I'm not selling their memory to a man who wouldn't understand what that means if I drew him a map. Morton's expression hardened. I understand plenty, Wade. I understand you're a stubborn fool clinging to the past while the future rides by, but I'm a patient man. I can wait. He swung back onto his horse, gathered the reins. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find me. In the meantime, think about what happens to places that can't defend themselves against progress. He rode out without waiting for a response, leaving Wade standing in the yard with his shoulders shaking and his fists still clenched. Ruthie came down from the porch slowly. Wade, he's not wrong. Wade's voice was raw. About me clinging to the past. About this place being too big for one man alone. Being alone and choosing to be alone are different things. You're choosing. Am I? He turned to face her. Or am I just too broken to imagine anything else? You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. Morton doesn't think so. Hell, half the county probably thinks the same. That Wade Langston's lost his mind out here with his ghosts. Ruthie moved closer, close enough to see the pain and doubt and fear warring in his face. What do you think? I think... He stopped, swallowed hard. I think I'm tired of being dead while I'm still breathing. I think I want to learn how to live again, even if I don't remember how. And I think having you here is the first thing that's made me believe it might be possible. The confession hung between them, raw and honest, and Ruthie felt something shift in her chest. Something dangerous. Something she absolutely could not afford to feel. Then we'll figure it out together, she said quietly. One day at a time. Wade nodded, but his eyes were still on the road where Morton had disappeared. He meant that threat, about places that can't defend themselves. Silas doesn't make idle conversation. Then we'll be ready. We? He looked at her sharply. Ruthie, this isn't your fight. I work here, sleep here, eat at your table. That makes it my fight, too. Something like gratitude flickered across his face, chased quickly by worry. You don't know what you're saying. Morton's not a man who takes no for an answer. Neither am I. Despite everything, Wade almost smiled. No, you're not. He drew a deep breath, squared his shoulders. Come on, let's get back to work. Best defense against men like Silas is proving them wrong about everything they think they know. They returned to the house, but the day had shifted somehow, become sharper, more urgent. Wade threw himself into work with new energy, tackling projects he'd avoided for years. He fixed loose boards on the porch, replaced cracked windows, repaired fence lines that had sagged into disrepair. And in the evenings, after supper, he'd disappear into the barn workshop. Ruthie would hear the sounds of sawing, planing, sanding, the music of creation. He didn't invite her out there, and she didn't intrude, but she noticed the sawdust on his clothes, the satisfaction in his face when he came in late. A week after Morton's visit, Wade appeared at breakfast with a small wooden box, which he set beside her plate without comment. Ruthie opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in sawdust, was a carved bird, some kind of songbird, perfect in every detail, wings spread as if caught mid-flight. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "First thing I've finished in 3 years." Wade's voice was gruff. "Figured you should have it, since you're the reason I picked up the tools again." She looked up at him, this man who was slowly remembering how to be human, and felt her careful defenses crack just a little more. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." "It's just a bird." "No, it's proof you can fly again." Their eyes held for a moment too long, and Ruthie saw him recognize the same dangerous current she was fighting against. Then he looked away, cleared his throat, reached for coffee. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said. That Ellen and Thomas would want me to live, not just survive. And I think you're right, which means I need to stop treating this place like a mausoleum, starting with the nursery." Ruthie's hand stilled on her cup. "You want to open it? I want you to help me clean it, sort through things, decide what to keep, what to—" His voice caught. "What to let go of. Can't do it alone. But I think maybe, with you there, I could manage." "Of course, whenever you're ready." "This afternoon." He said it quickly, like he might lose courage if he waited. "Before I change my mind." So that afternoon found them standing outside the nursery door, the key warm in Ruthie's palm, while Wade gathered himself to face what he'd locked away. "Last time I was in here," he said quietly, "was the day after the funeral. I came to close the window Ellen had opened. She always said Thomas needed fresh air, and I stood looking at everything we'd built for him and couldn't breathe. Felt like the room itself was suffocating me with all that love turned to loss. It doesn't have to suffocate you now, doesn't it? No. Now it can just be a room where a little boy lived, where he was loved. That's not suffocating, that's sacred." Wade closed his eyes, nodded once. "Open it." Ruthie unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped back to let Wade enter first. He stood on the threshold for a long moment, then crossed into the room like a man wading into deep water. "Smells the same," he said wonderfully. "I don't know how, but it smells exactly the same, like her soap and his baby powder and wood smoke from the fireplace." Ruthie joined him, and together they began the careful work of going through Thomas's things. Each item carried weight: the toy soldiers Wade had bought in Dallas, the books Ellen had read aloud every night, the quilt her mother had stitched before dying herself. They worked slowly, Wade telling stories about each object until the room filled with memory made tangible through words. "This?" Wade held up a small shirt, blue cotton worn soft with washing. This was his favorite. Wore it till Ellen threatened to burn it if he didn't let her mend the holes. What did he love about it? Had horses embroidered on the pocket. Ellen's work. He used to trace them with his finger and make up stories about where they were running to. They packed the clothes carefully, Wade deciding what to keep, what to donate, working through grief one small garment at a time. When they reached the toy box, he paused. "These should go to children who can use them. Thomas would have liked that. He was always wanting to share, even when it cost him something he loved. He sounds like he was a good boy." "The best." Wade's voice broke. "The absolute best. And I only had him for 4 years. 4 years out of all the years I'm going to live, and it doesn't seem fair that I have to keep going without him." Ruthie set down the wooden horse she was holding and turned to face Wade fully. "It's not fair, none of it is. But he was yours for 4 years, and you were his for 4 years. And that love doesn't disappear just because he did. You carry it forward. You let it make you better, kinder, more human." Wade looked at her with tears tracking down his face, the first tears she'd seen him shed. "How do I do that? How do I carry love when it hurts this much?" "One breath at a time, one day at a time, and you let people help you." He reached for her then, not romantically, just desperately, and she stepped into his embrace and held him while he shook with sobs he'd been holding back for 3 years. They stood there in his dead son's room, and Wade Langston finally let himself grieve. When the storm passed, he pulled back, scrubbed at his face. "Sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize. Grief deserves space." "You're remarkable, you know that?" He said it softly, with wonder. "Came here expecting nothing, asking nothing, and somehow you've given me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever." "You did the work, Wade. I just stood witness." "No, you did more than that." He took her hand, held it between both of his. "And I need you to know, whatever happens with Morton, whatever comes next, I'm grateful you stayed." The warmth of his hands, the intensity in his eyes, the way the afternoon light fell across his face, it all conspired to make Ruthie feel things she absolutely shouldn't be feeling. She was his housekeeper, an employee, a woman with a past that made her unsuitable for anything more. But standing there in that room full of love and loss, she wanted to be more. Wanted it with a fierceness that terrified her. "We should finish," she said, gently extracting her hand, "before it gets dark." If Wade noticed her retreat, he didn't comment. They worked until twilight filled the corners, then closed the door, but didn't lock it. "I want to be able to come in here," Wade said. "Remember them properly instead of sealing them away." "That's good. That's healing." They walked downstairs together, and Ruthie started supper while Wade washed up. The house felt different now, lighter, as if grief itself was beginning to release its stranglehold on the walls. But that night, as Ruthie lay in her small bed listening to the ranch settle into silence, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Horses. Multiple horses, moving fast, coming from the direction of the gate. She dressed quickly, grabbed the lamp, and met Wade in the hallway. He'd heard them too. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the stairs. "Not a chance." They reached the front door together, just as the riders thundered into the yard. 4 men, faces hidden by bandanas, torches held high. "Wade Langston," one of them shouted. "Morton sends his regards. Says you got 1 week to reconsider his offer before things get unpleasant." Wade stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. When had he grabbed that? "You tell Morton he can take his regards," and one of the riders hurled his torch. It arced through darkness and crashed through a window into the parlor, and suddenly there was fire blooming inside the house, where Ellen had played piano, where Thomas had listened to lullabies, where love had lived before death took it. Wade and Ruthie moved together, him for the flames, her for water, racing against disaster while the riders laughed and wheeled away into darkness, their message delivered with fire and fear. They fought the blaze for an hour, using blankets and water and desperate determination, until finally the last ember died, and they stood in the ruined parlor, covered in soot and ash, breathing hard. The piano was damaged beyond repair, the curtains gone, the wall blackened and scarred. Wade stared at the destruction with an expression Ruthie couldn't read. Then quietly, he said, "He's not going to stop." "No, he's not. I won't sell. Even if he burns it all down, I won't sell." "Then we fight back." Wade looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life with nothing, asking nothing, and somehow become essential to his survival. "We," Ruthie confirmed. "You're not alone anymore, Wade Langston, and neither is this ranch. Whatever comes next, we face it together." In the darkness, standing amid the wreckage of what Morton's violence had destroyed, Wade reached for her hand and held on tight, and Ruthie held back, knowing she'd just committed herself to a war she might not survive, but unable, despite all wisdom, to walk away. Outside, the night wind carried the smell of smoke across land that had seen too much loss already. But inside, 2 people who'd forgotten how to hope were learning to fight for something worth saving. And that, Ruthie thought, was how you started to heal. Not by avoiding pain, but by choosing, deliberately and with eyes open, to defend what mattered against whatever darkness came next. The morning after this fire, Wade rode into Cedar Falls with Ruthie beside him on the wagon seat, the scorched parlor curtains folded in a box at their feet, like evidence of a crime. Smoke still clung to their clothes, and exhaustion had drawn circles under both their eyes, but Wade's jaw was set with the kind of determination Ruthie hadn't seen in him before. Not resignation, not grief, but something harder and more focused. They pulled up in front of the sheriff's office just as the town was shaking off sleep. Wade helped Ruthie down, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary on her elbow, then gathered the box and pushed through the door. Sheriff Tom Brennan looked up from his desk, coffee halfway to his lips, and took in their appearance with the quick assessment of a man who'd seen his share of trouble. "Wade, Miss McLaren, you two look like you've been through hell." "Close enough." Wade set the box on the desk, opened it to reveal the charred fabric. "Had visitors last night. 4 riders, faces covered, torches lit. One of them threw this through my parlor window after delivering a message from Silas Morton." Brennan's expression went carefully neutral. "What kind of message?" "The kind that says I've got a week to reconsider his offer to buy Blackbriar Ranch before things get unpleasant. Seems setting my house on fire was his way of demonstrating what unpleasant looks like." The sheriff stood, moved to the window, looked out at the quiet street with his back to them. "That's a serious accusation, Wade. You got proof it was Morton's men?" "They said his name. Said he sent regards." Men with covered faces saying a name isn't the same as proof. Could have been anyone claiming to work for Morton. Could have been enemies of yours using his name to deflect blame. Wade's hands clenched on the desk edge. "Tom, we've known each other 20 years. You know I'm not given to wild accusations or crying wolf. 4 armed men rode onto my property in the middle of the night and set fire to my home. Whether Morton ordered it directly or just created the conditions where men feel comfortable doing his dirty work, he's responsible." Brennan turned back and Ruthie saw the conflict in his face, duty warring against politics, justice against practicality. "Wade, I believe you. But believing and proving are different animals. Morton's got connections now, county commissioners, land office officials, investors from back east. He's building something bigger than any of us anticipated, and he's got the kind of money that makes people look the other way when questions get asked." "So you're not going to do anything?" Ruthie heard herself ask, her voice sharp with anger. "I didn't say that, ma'am. I'm saying I need more than Wade's word against Morton's denial. If you can give me something solid, names, faces, physical evidence that ties those riders to Morton, then I can act." Wade's shoulders sagged slightly. "The only evidence we have is a burned parlor and the memory of threats shouted in the dark." "Then my hands are tied." Brennan's voice was genuinely regretful. "I can file a report, note the incident, but without more to go on, there's no case to pursue." "What if they come back?" Ruthie demanded. "What if next time they burn more than curtains?" "Then you defend yourselves within the bounds of the law, and you make damn sure you can identify who you're defending against." The sheriff looked at Wade. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the reality we're dealing with. Morton's playing a long game, and he's careful not to leave fingerprints." Wade gathered the box, his movements controlled but radiating frustration. "Thanks for your time, Tom." "Wade," Brennan called as they reached the door. "Watch your back out there. Morton's not the kind of man who makes threats he doesn't intend to follow through on." "Yeah," Wade said flatly. "I'm getting that impression." They walked out into morning sunlight that felt too bright, too cheerful for the darkness they were carrying. Wade loaded the box back into the wagon, then stood there gripping the side rail hard enough to make the wood creak. "He's right, you know," he said finally. "Morton's got this whole county in his pocket. Sheriff can't help us, or won't. Amounts to the same thing." "Then we help ourselves." Wade looked at her. "How?" "I'm one man with a burned house and enemies I can't prove exist." Ruthie's mind was working fast, sorting through possibilities, discarding what wouldn't serve and holding on to what might. "You said Morton's been buying up neighboring properties. Why?" "Building an empire. He was always ambitious, even during the war. Wanted to be the biggest, the richest, the most powerful. Guess he figured out how to do it." "No, I mean, why these specific properties? What makes this land worth more than land somewhere else?" Wade considered. "Water rights, mostly. There's talk of railroad expansion coming through in the next few years. Land with good water access and proximity to potential rail lines is going to be worth 10 times what it is now. And your ranch has both. Best water in the county. Creek runs year-round, springs that never dry out, even in drought. And if the rail line comes through where they're saying, my southern boundary would be prime loading territory." Ruthie felt pieces clicking together in her mind. So Morton needs your land specifically, not just any land, yours, which means you have leverage you're not using. Ruthie, I told you I'm not selling. I'm not suggesting you sell. I'm suggesting you remind Morton that he needs you more than you need him, that burning you out doesn't get him what he wants. It just makes you an obstacle he can't remove. Wade studied her with new respect. You've got a strategic mind hiding behind that housekeeper's apron. Had to learn to think strategically when I lost everything. Survival requires planning. She climbed onto the wagon seat. Take me to the county recorder's office. Why? Because if Morton's been buying property, there are records, deeds, transfers, legal documents that might tell us something useful about his plans. And because I have a feeling we need to know exactly what we're dealing with before his next move. The recorder's office was a small room in the back of the courthouse, presided over by a clerk who looked like he'd been born old and was working his way toward ancient. He peered at them over spectacles that magnified his eyes to owl-like proportions. Help you folks? We'd like to see property transfer records for the past year, Ruthie said. Specifically purchases made by Silas Morton or any companies associated with him. The clerk's magnified eyes blinked slowly. That's public record, but it'll take some time to pull. You want to wait or come back? We'll wait. They settled onto a hard bench while the clerk disappeared into back rooms, emerging periodically with ledgers and deed books that he spread across a table. Wade and Ruthie pored over them, tracing Morton's acquisitions through the dry language of legal documents. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Morton was systematically buying everything that bordered or approached the creek that ran through Wade's land. Not just ranches, homesteads, small farms, even a few parcels that seemed worthless until you mapped them and saw how they created a corridor leading directly to Blackbriar Ranch. He's boxing you in, Ruthie said, pointing to the map Wade was sketching. Look, he owns everything east of you now, most of the land to the south, and he's working on the western parcels. If he gets those, you'll be surrounded. Your only access to town would be through his property. Wade's face had gone pale. He could cut me off, control my access to markets, to supplies, to everything. Even if I kept the ranch, it would be worthless if I couldn't get cattle to sale or bring goods in. Unless there's another way in. Is there? Wade thought hard. There's an old trail through the North Hills, but it's rough, barely passable even in good weather. Would take days to drive cattle that way instead of hours on the main road. Ruthie turned back to the ledgers, searching for something, anything that might help. Then she saw it. A notation on one of the deeds that made her breath catch. Wade, look at this. She pointed to a transfer document for the Henderson property, one of Morton's first acquisitions. In the legal description, there was a clause she almost missed. Said property held in trust pending verification of sole heir status per Henderson last will and testament dated March 1873. Well, what does that mean? Wade asked. It means the Henderson property wasn't sold outright. It's in some kind of trust arrangement. She looked at the clerk. Sir, do you have will records here? Estate documents are with the probate court, next building over. They gathered their notes and crossed to the probate office, where a harried-looking woman was dealing with a line of petitioners. When they finally reached the front, Ruthie explained what they needed. Henderson estate papers would be in the 1874 files, the woman said, already moving toward filing cabinets. Give me a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched to 30, but finally she emerged with a folder tied in red ribbon. Here, you can review it at that table, but nothing leaves this office. The Henderson will was straightforward enough. The old rancher had left everything to his only son, who died in a riding accident 2 years later. But there was a codicil, added shortly before Henderson's death, that caught Ruthie's attention. In the event of my son's death without issue, said property to be held in trust for a period of 7 years to allow for discovery of any unknown heirs, after which time property may be sold with proceeds distributed per this instrument. What's the date on this codicil? Ruthie asked urgently. Wade checked. March 1873, which means the 7-year trust period doesn't expire until March 1880, 3 more years. Ruthie felt excitement building. Wade, don't you see? Morton doesn't actually own the Henderson property. He's holding it in trust, which means he can't do whatever he wants with it. There are probably restrictions on what he can use it for, how he can develop it. How does that help us? I don't know yet, but it's information Morton probably doesn't want widely known. If people realized his empire is built partly on property he doesn't fully control. She trailed off, thinking, are there will records for any of the other properties he bought? They spent the next 2 hours digging through estate files, and the pattern became clearer. Several of Morton's acquisitions were properties with complicated inheritance situations, trust arrangements, or disputed ownership that he'd somehow managed to purchase despite legal complications that should have prevented it. He's found a way to exploit the system, Wade said slowly, buying property that's legally tangled, probably for less than it's worth, then using his connections to push through paperwork that shouldn't be approved. And if someone challenged those purchases, showed they weren't legal, his whole structure would collapse. But who's going to challenge him? The people who sold to him are dead or gone, and anyone else who might care doesn't have the resources to fight lawyers and county officials. Ruthie sat back, mind racing. What about your property? How is it held? Free and clear. My father bought it from the state, paid in full, deeded directly to him. When he died, it passed to me. No trust, no complications. You're sure? I've got all the papers at the house. Why? Because if your property is legally solid, Morton can't pull the same tricks he used elsewhere. He actually needs you to sell willingly, or a cold thought struck her, or he needs you to die without clear succession. Wade's face went hard. I don't have heirs. When I die, the property would go to, hell, I don't even know. Haven't updated my will since Ellen and Thomas died. Then the first thing we do when we get home is find those papers. Make sure everything is actually as clear as you think. And the second thing is you make a new will, properly witnessed, that specifies exactly what happens to the ranch if something happens to you. Ruthie, you're talking like Morton might actually try to kill me. She met his eyes steadily. After last night, can you honestly say he wouldn't? The silence that followed was answer enough. They left the courthouse as afternoon was fading toward evening, Wade's face set in grim determination, Ruthie's mind still sorting through possibilities and dangers. They'd learned enough to be more frightened and more prepared in equal measure. The ride back to the ranch passed in tense quiet, both of them scanning the horizon for riders that might or might not come. When they finally pulled through the gate and saw the house still standing, still whole except for the burned parlor, the relief was almost physical. Wade unhitched the team while Ruthie went inside to start supper. But as she was pulling out flour for biscuits, she heard the sound of a single horse approaching, fast, urgent. She looked out to see a boy of maybe 14 sliding off a lathered mount, running toward Wade where he was working in the barn. They spoke urgently, the boy gesturing, Wade's posture going rigid. Then Wade was striding toward the house with an expression that made Ruthie's stomach drop. What is it? Fire at the Morrison place, the ranch Morton bought last month. The family that was still living in the house until the sale finalized, they're trapped inside. He was already grabbing rope, a shovel, anything that might be useful. I have to go help. I'm coming with you. Ruthie, don't argue. You need every hand available, and I'm capable. He looked like he wanted to protest, but there wasn't time. Fine, but you stay back from the flames. Understand? I can't. He stopped himself. Just be careful. They rode hard, the boy leading the way, arriving to find the Morrison homestead already engulfed, flames shooting through the roof, smoke billowing black against darkening sky. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, probably drawn by the glow visible for miles. But they stood helpless, the fire already too advanced to fight. Wade dismounted, running. Where's the family? Got out through a window, someone called back. Morrison's got burns and the wife's half dead from smoke, but they're alive. Anyone else inside? No, thank heaven. Kids were already at their grandmother's. Wade stopped, turned to really look at the burning house, and Ruthie saw the moment realization hit him. This wasn't an accident, he said quietly. A man nearby, one of the neighbors who'd helped fight the flames, shook his head. Started in 3 places at once. We saw when we got here. 3 separate fires, like someone set them deliberate. Who would do that? Morrison's family already sold. They were just living there till they could move. Wade's eyes found Ruthie's across the crowd, and she saw her own thoughts reflected back. Morton, making a point, showing what happened to property he owned, to people who stayed too long in houses that were no longer theirs. The Morrison house burned through the night, collapsing finally into glowing embers that would smolder for days. The family, shocked and displaced, was taken in by neighbors. And Wade and Ruthie rode home through pre-dawn darkness that felt heavy with threat. "He's escalating," Wade said as they approached Blackbriar Ranch. "First my place, now Morrison's. He's showing the whole county what happens to people who stand in his way. Or showing you specifically what he's capable of." Wade looked at her. "You think this was a message for me?" "I think everything Morton does is calculated. He knows you'll hear about this fire, connect it to yours, understand that he's willing to destroy anything to get what he wants." They reached the house as the sun was breaking over distant hills, painting the land in shades of gold and amber that should have been beautiful, but felt ominous instead. Wade helped Ruthie down from the wagon, and they stood there in the yard, exhausted and frightened and angry. "I need to find those papers," Wade said. "My father's deed, my will, everything that proves this land is mine, free and clear. Because if Morton's going to come at me legally as well as with fire, I need to know where I stand." "I'll help you look." They went inside together, and Wade led her to his study, a room she'd cleaned but never really examined. He pulled books from shelves, opened desk drawers, searched through file boxes until he found what he was looking for: a leather portfolio tied with string, heavy with documents. He spread them on the desk, and they went through each paper carefully. The original land grant from the state, his father's purchase deed, dated 1868. The will that transferred everything to Wade when his father died in 1871. Marriage certificate for Wade and Ellen. Birth certificate for Thomas. And then the documents that stopped Wade's hands mid-motion: Thomas's death certificate, Ellen's death certificate, side by side like accusations. "I can't," Wade's voice broke. "I can't look at these." Ruthie gently took the certificates, set them aside. "You don't have to. Let's focus on the legal documents." But as she was organizing the papers, a sealed envelope fell from the bottom of the portfolio. It was addressed to Wade in handwriting she didn't recognize, with a legal firm's name in the return address: Blackwell and Associates, Austin, Texas. "Wade, have you seen this?" He looked up, frowned. "That's my father's lawyer, but I don't remember." He took the envelope, broke the seal, pulled out papers that had clearly been sitting unopened for years. As he read, his face went through a series of changes: confusion, surprise, then something like wonder mixed with pain. "What is it?" Wade looked up at her with eyes that seemed to be seeing something far away. "It's a trust document. My father set it up before he died. He must have known his heart was failing, wanted to protect the ranch. The property is not actually in my name. It's held in trust under Thomas's name, with me as administrator until he came of age." Ruthie felt her pulse quicken. "But Thomas is dead." "That's just it. According to this, the trust doesn't dissolve with Thomas's death. It continues in perpetuity for any heir of my blood, with provisions that if no direct heir can claim it, the land goes to the state for preservation as public grazing land." Wade's hands were shaking. "Morton can't buy this property. Even if I wanted to sell, even if I died tomorrow, the ranch is locked in trust. The only way it could be sold is if someone could prove the trust was invalid or fraudulent, or—" A sound from the front of the house cut her off. Footsteps on the porch, a knock that sounded more like a demand. Wade and Ruthie exchanged glances, and she saw him slide one hand toward the desk drawer where he kept a pistol. He moved to the door, opened it with his body blocking Ruthie from whoever was outside. Silas Morton stood on the porch, dressed like he was heading to a Sunday service, smiling like they were old friends instead of enemies. "Wade, Miss McLaren, hope I'm not interrupting." "What do you want, Silas?" "Heard about the fire at the Morrison place. Terrible tragedy. Thought I should check on my neighbors. Make sure you're both all right." His eyes slid past Wade to Ruthie. "Must have been frightening, seeing that house burn. Reminded you of your own little incident, I imagine." Wade's voice went deadly quiet. "You've got 30 seconds to state your business before I throw you off my property." Morton's smile didn't waver. "Direct as always, fine. I'll be direct too. I know about the trust, Wade." Ruthie felt ice slide down her spine. I know your father locked this property up tighter than a bank vault, thinking he was protecting it for his grandson. But here's what you maybe don't know. Trust can be challenged, especially trust based on heirs who died before coming of age, especially when the administrator, that's you, shows clear evidence of mental instability, inability to maintain the property, dangerous living conditions. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? You've been living alone in a decaying mansion for 3 years, drinking yourself half to death, driving off every person who tried to help you. Then suddenly you hire a woman with no references, no background, no explanation for where she came from or why she's here. His eyes locked on Ruthie. That's what we call a pattern of poor judgment, Wade. The kind of pattern that makes a court question your fitness as a trust administrator. Wade stepped forward, and Ruthie grabbed his arm, held him back. You're going to challenge the trust, she said flatly. I'm going to do what needs to be done to acquire property I need for legitimate business development. That means going to court to prove Wade Langston is mentally incompetent to administer his father's trust. Then that's what I'll do. Get off my land. Wade's voice was shaking with rage. Now. Morton tipped his hat. 1 week, Wade. Then I file papers with the court. You want to avoid that, you know what to do. Sell to me directly. Clean transfer. Good price. And we all move on like civilized men. I'll die first. That, Morton said softly, can be arranged too. He walked to his horse, swung into the saddle with easy grace, and rode away without looking back. Wade and Ruthie stood watching until he disappeared beyond the gate. Then Wade turned and slammed his fist into the porch post hard enough to split skin. He's going to do it. He's going to drag me into court, claim I'm incompetent, try to break the trust. Can he win? Wade looked at his bleeding knuckles. I don't know, maybe. I haven't exactly been the picture of stable living these past few years. And if he brings up Ellen and Thomas, the grief, the isolation... He stopped. And then there's you. Me? Ruthie, you never told me where you came from, what you're running from, but if Morton digs into your past, finds something he can use to prove I'm exercising poor judgment by employing you, he'll find plenty. The admission hurt, but she owed Wade honesty. My husband's death left me with debts I couldn't pay. I tried to keep his shop running, but I was a woman operating a business in a man's world, and when I wouldn't... She stopped, swallowed. When I wouldn't accept certain arrangements with creditors, they started spreading rumors about my character, my morals, my fitness to run a business. Within 6 months, I'd lost everything, and my reputation was destroyed. That's what I'm running from, Wade. I'm the scandal Morton will use to prove you're incompetent. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then, did you do what they accused you of? No. Then I don't care what Morton digs up. Your past doesn't define you any more than mine defines me. Wade, you don't understand. In court, with lawyers, the truth doesn't matter as much as what can be proven. And what can be proven is that you hired a woman with no references, no background check, no verification of character. That looks like poor judgment, whether it actually is or not. So what do we do? Ruthie looked at him. This man who'd been broken and was slowly becoming whole, who'd given her refuge when she had nowhere else to go, who'd trusted her when trust should have been impossible. And she made a decision that would change everything. We get ahead of it, she said. We go public with the truth before Morton can twist it. We show the county exactly who we are, what we're doing, and why we're worth defending. How? We get married. The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their simplicity and their implications. Wade stared at her. What? Not for real. I mean, legally real, but not... Ruthie was fumbling, trying to explain something she hadn't fully thought through. If we're married, you're not a grief-mad hermit with questionable judgment. You're a man who found love again, who brought life back to his home. And I'm not a woman of uncertain character. I'm your wife, with every legal right to be here. It takes away Morton's ammunition. Ruthie, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Because Morton's right about one thing. Together, we look questionable. But as husband and wife, we look like exactly what we actually are. Two people trying to build something good out of broken pieces. Wade's face was unreadable. And after? When Morton's dealt with and you want your freedom back? We'll figure that out when we get there. For now, this solves the immediate problem. It's not fair to you. Fair? Ruthie almost laughed. Wade, nothing about any of this is fair, but it's strategic, it's legal, and it might be the only way to protect this ranch and both our futures. He looked at her for a long time, and she saw him working through possibilities, weighing costs against benefits, trying to find another way. Finally, he said, "If we do this, we do it properly. Not some rushed ceremony that looks like we're hiding something. We file proper papers, have a real wedding, let the whole county see that this is legitimate." Agreed. And Ruthie, his voice went soft, "If we're going to do this, even as a strategy, you need to know that I care about you. Not the way I loved Ellen. That was different, a different time, different people. But I care what happens to you, and I don't want you sacrificing yourself for a cause that's not even yours. It became my cause the night Morton's men threw torches at this house. Maybe earlier, if I'm honest. This place, this life, it matters to me now. You matter to me." She met his eyes steadily. "So let's protect what matters." Wade reached out, took her hand, and this time the touch felt different, not comfort or gratitude, but partnership. "Then we'll do it. Tomorrow we ride into town, file our intentions, and show Silas Morton that he picked the wrong ranch to target." They stood there on the porch as morning light strengthened around them, two people who'd found each other at the end of roads, and were choosing, deliberately, and with full knowledge of the costs, to stand together against whatever came next. Inside the house, the trust documents lay on Wade's desk, proof that Thomas's memory protected the land even in death. And outside, beyond the gate, Silas Morton was planning his next move in a game that had just become far more complicated than he'd anticipated. But on that porch, holding hands in the growing light, Wade and Ruthie weren't thinking about Morton or trusts or legal battles. They were thinking about the strange, unexpected grace of finding alliance in the least likely place, and the fierce, protective love that grows not from romance but from choosing, again and again, to defend what matters most. The war was coming, but they wouldn't face it alone. They rode into Cedar Falls the next morning, dressed in their best clothes, Wade in a clean shirt and vest that Ruthie had pressed the night before, Ruthie in a simple blue dress she'd mended and remended until the seams were nearly invisible. The town was just waking up, storekeepers sweeping boardwalks, women with market baskets starting their daily rounds, and the sight of Wade Langston arriving with his housekeeper beside him drew looks that ranged from curious to scandalized. Wade helped Ruthie down from the wagon with deliberate courtesy, offered his arm, and walked with her straight to the county clerk's office like they had every right in the world to be there together. The clerk looked up from his ledger, recognized Wade, and his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Mr. Langston, Miss McLaren, how can I help you folks this morning?" "We're here to file notice of intent to marry," Wade said clearly, his voice carrying to the two other people waiting in the office. "What do we need to do?" The clerk's mouth opened and closed twice before words came out. "Well, there's a form to fill out, 3-day waiting period. Then you can have any minister or judge perform the ceremony." He pulled papers from a drawer with hands that shook slightly. That is, congratulations are in order, I suppose." "Thank you." Wade took the forms, began filling them out with Ruthie standing close enough to read over his shoulder. Name, age, residence, previous marital status. He paused at that last one, pen hovering over the line, before writing widower in steady script. Ruthie added her information in the spaces provided, her handwriting smaller and more careful than Wade's bold strokes. When they were done, the clerk reviewed everything with the thoroughness of a man who knew these documents would be discussed at every dinner table in town by nightfall. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll post the notice today and you can marry any time after Thursday." He looked between them. "You folks sure about this?" "No offense, but it's a bit sudden." "We're sure," Wade said firmly. "Miss McLaren has made me remember what it means to live instead of just exist. I'd be a fool to let her slip away." The clerk stamped the papers with more force than strictly necessary. "Well then, best wishes to you both." They emerged into sunlight that felt too bright, too exposing. Ruthie could feel eyes on them from every direction, shopkeepers pausing mid-sweep, women whispering behind their hands, men exchanging significant looks. The news would spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire through dry grass, and by noon everyone would know that Wade Langston was marrying his housekeeper. That wasn't so bad, Wade murmured as they walked toward the general store. That was the easy part. Wait until people start asking questions. They didn't have to wait long. The storekeeper, the same man who'd given Ruthie directions to Blackbriar Ranch months ago, greeted them with barely concealed astonishment. Wade, Miss McLaren, heard you just came from the clerk's office. News travels fast. Wade set his supply list on the counter. We'll need these items, and whatever fabric you've got suitable for a wedding dress. The storekeeper's wife emerged from the back room like she'd been summoned by magic. A wedding dress? Oh, my dear, let me show you what we have. She took Ruthie's arm, steering her toward bolts of cloth while firing questions. When's the ceremony? Who's performing it? Will you have a reception? What about flowers? Ruthie answered as best she could, overwhelmed by the woman's enthusiasm, while Wade conducted business at the counter. But through the fabric displays and the chatter, she could hear other conversations happening in lowered voices. Awfully fast, don't you think? Barely knows the woman. After what happened to Ellen, you'd think he'd be more careful. Wade heard them too. She saw his shoulders stiffen, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, but he kept his voice level, kept conducting his business like the whispers didn't exist. Then the door opened and Silas Morton walked in. The store went silent. Every conversation died mid-word, every eye swiveled to watch what would happen next. Morton took in the scene with a glance. Wade at the counter, Ruthie surrounded by fabric, the storekeeper's wife frozen with a bolt of ivory silk in her hands. Well, Morton said pleasantly, isn't this cozy? Heard a rumor you two were getting married. Came to see if it was true. It's true. Wade turned to face him fully. Filed the papers this morning. How romantic. Whirlwind courtship, I assume. Can't have been more than a few months since Miss McLaren arrived in town. Long enough to know what we want. Morton's smile was sharp as broken glass. And what you want is to marry your housekeeper 3 days before I file papers challenging your competency as trust administrator. That's quite a coincidence. The store was so quiet, Ruthie could hear her own heartbeat. She stepped forward, leaving the fabric behind, and faced Morton with her chin up and her voice steady. What we want, Mr. Morton, is to build a life together. The timing is our business, not yours. Everything that happens on Blackbriar Ranch is my business, Miss McLaren, especially when it looks like a desperate attempt to appear stable and respectable before a court challenges your employer's, your fiancé's, fitness to control valuable land. Wade moved faster than Ruthie expected, closing the distance between himself and Morton in 2 strides. You want to question my judgment? Do it in court. You want to insult my future wife? Do it somewhere I can respond appropriately without witnesses. Morton didn't back down, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, reassessment. Easy, Wade. I'm not insulting anyone, just making observations. He looked past Wade to Ruthie. Though I am curious, Miss McLaren, where exactly did you say you were from? Philadelphia, wasn't it? Easy enough to verify if someone were inclined to check. Ruthie felt ice in her stomach, but kept her expression neutral. I've got nothing to hide, Mr. Morton. Everyone's got something to hide. Question is whether it's worth the effort to dig it up. He turned back to Wade. Fair warning, old friend. I'm going to look into your bride's background. Make sure she's everything she claims to be. For your own protection, of course. Do your worst, Silas. You won't find anything that changes my mind. We'll see. Morton tipped his hat to the room at large. Congratulations on your pending nuptials. I'll be sure to send a gift. He walked out, leaving silence and tension thick enough to choke on. The storekeeper cleared his throat. Wade, I'm sorry. Not your fault. Wade's voice was tight. How much do I owe you? They completed the transaction quickly, took their packages, and left with as much dignity as they could muster. But Ruthie could feel the whispers starting up again before they even cleared the door. In the wagon, heading back toward the ranch, Wade finally spoke. He's going to dig into your past. I know. And he's going to find what exactly? Ruthie stared at the road ahead. He'll find that I was married to James McLaren, a bookbinder in Philadelphia. That James died in a factory accident that left me with more debts than assets. That I tried to keep the business running but couldn't get credit because I was a woman, couldn't get customers because I was a widow, couldn't get help because I wouldn't. She stopped. Wouldn't what? There were men who offered to help. Creditors, business associates of James's. Men who said they could make my problems disappear if I was willing to be grateful in certain ways. The words tasted bitter. When I refused, they started rumors. Said I was already being grateful to other men. Said my morals were as loose as my business practices. Within months, my reputation was destroyed, my credit was gone, and staying in Philadelphia meant choosing between starvation or becoming what they'd already accused me of being. Wade's hands were white-knuckled on the reins. So you ran. So I ran, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find, sewing, cooking, cleaning, stayed in each place just long enough to earn passage to the next, kept moving until I ran out of road and money at the same time, right here in Cedar Falls. And now Morton's going to drag all of that out into daylight. He's going to try. Question is whether people will believe his version or ours. Wade looked at her. I believe yours. That's what matters. Wade, when Morton tells the court that you married a woman who was accused of selling herself to pay debts, then I'll tell the court that you're a woman who refused to compromise her dignity even when it cost her everything, that you're stronger and braver than any person I've ever met, and that I'm honored you'd consider marrying me. Ruthie felt tears sting her eyes. You might be the only person in Texas who sees it that way. Then everyone else is blind. He reached over, took her hand. We're doing this, Ruthie, together. Let Morton dig up whatever he wants. We'll face it the same way we've faced everything else, head on, with the truth. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not tense, but settled. By the time they reached the ranch, Ruthie had made peace with what was coming. Morton would dig, he'd find things, he'd twist them to serve his purpose. But she wouldn't run anymore. Not from him, not from her past, not from the future she was choosing with Wade. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ruthie sewed her wedding dress by lamplight, simple ivory silk that the storekeeper's wife had insisted on giving them at cost. Wade cleaned the parlor, the parts that hadn't burned, and brought in furniture from other rooms to make it presentable. They didn't talk much about the ceremony itself, focusing instead on the practical arrangements. Who would perform it, who would witness, what they'd tell people. Wade wanted the wedding at the ranch, in daylight, with witnesses from town. If we're making a statement, we make it loud, he said. No hiding, no sneaking around like we're ashamed. So Ruthie wrote invitations in her careful script, and Wade delivered them personally to neighbors, to the storekeeper and his wife, to Sheriff Brennan and the county clerk, and anyone else who might come. Some accepted enthusiastically, others made excuses. But enough said yes that by Thursday afternoon, there would be witnesses to see Wade Langston marry his housekeeper. Wednesday night, Ruthie couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window looking out over land that had become home without her noticing when it happened, and tried to imagine what came next. Marriage to Wade would solve certain problems, but it would create others. They'd be bound together legally, publicly, irrevocably, at least until the crisis with Morton passed and they could quietly dissolve what they'd created. But standing there in the darkness, Ruthie realized she didn't want to dissolve it. Somewhere between scrubbing floors and fighting fires, between opening locked nurseries and filing marriage papers, she'd fallen in love with Wade Langston. Not the dramatic, sweeping love of romance novels, but the quieter, deeper love that grows from seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. She loved his broken places and his healing ones, loved his stubborn refusal to surrender what mattered, loved the way he carved wood with patient precision and spoke his dead son's name without flinching anymore. Loved him and hadn't meant to, and didn't know what to do with the feeling. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Come in." Wade entered, still dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. "Saw your light. Figured you might be having second thoughts." "Not second thoughts, just thoughts." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "Tomorrow we tell the world we're choosing each other. You ready for that?" "Are you?" "I asked you first." Ruthie looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd given her refuge and purpose and something she was afraid to name. I'm ready, but Wade, I need you to know something. What? This started as strategy. A way to protect you from Morton's accusations. A way to make my presence here legally defensible. But it's not just strategy anymore. Not for me. Wade's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded moving across his features. Not for me either. They stood there, the truth hanging between them like something fragile and precious. Then Wade reached up, touched her face with gentle fingers, gave her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he leaned in and kissed her, soft, tentative, asking permission with every movement. Ruthie kissed him back, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through country that had tried to break her. His arms came around her solid and warm, and she let herself be held by someone who knew what loss tasted like and was choosing hope anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, when I say those vows, I'm going to mean them. Not because of Morton or the ranch or strategy. Because of you. I'll mean them too. Even knowing what comes after, the fight, the court case, all of it. Especially knowing that. You don't get to face it alone anymore. He smiled, really smiled, and Ruthie saw the man he must have been before grief carved him hollow. Warm, steady, capable of joy. Then I guess we're really doing this. I guess we are. He kissed her once more, then left her to her thoughts and her sleeplessness. But when Ruthie finally crawled into bed, she slept better than she had in months, dreaming of wood shavings and piano music and a future that looked nothing like the past. Thursday dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that makes promises about summer. Ruthie dressed in her ivory silk, pinned her hair up with care, and tried to calm the butterflies rioting in her stomach. This was supposed to be strategic. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman preparing to marry a man she loved, and strategy had nothing to do with it. Downstairs, Wade was already dressed in a dark suit that made him look formal and handsome and slightly uncomfortable. He was arranging chairs in the parlor, moving furniture to create space for the small ceremony. When he saw Ruthie on the stairs, he froze. You're beautiful. She felt heat climb her cheeks. It's just a dress. It's not the dress. He crossed to meet her at the bottom of the stairs, took her hands. Ruthie, are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back without consequences. I'm sure. Are you? Haven't been this sure about anything since the day I asked Ellen to marry me. He said it simply, without apology, and Ruthie understood he was offering her honesty instead of pretty lies. I loved her. Part of me always will. But what I feel for you is different, and it's real, and it deserves its own space. That's all I ask. I'm not trying to replace her. I know, that's one of the things I love about you. The word hung there between them. Love, spoken out loud, making real what they'd been dancing around for days. Before Ruthie could respond, they heard the sound of wagons approaching, voices calling out greetings. Guests are arriving, Wade said. You ready to become Mrs. Langston? More ready than I've ever been for anything. They welcomed people together. The storekeeper and his wife, several neighboring ranchers with their families, Sheriff Brennan looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, the county clerk who'd filed their papers. Not a huge gathering, but enough to witness, enough to make it real. The minister from the town church arrived precisely on time, a kind-faced man who'd known Wade since he was a boy. He took in the assembled guests, the hastily arranged parlor, Wade and Ruthie standing together, and smiled. Shall we begin? They gathered in the parlor where Ellen had once played piano, where Thomas had listened to lullabies, where fire had scarred the walls but not destroyed the space. The minister opened his book, and Wade and Ruthie stood facing each other while sunlight streamed through windows Ruthie had scrubbed clean. The ceremony was simple, traditional, the words worn smooth by countless repetitions but no less powerful for their familiarity. Wade spoke his vows in a clear voice that didn't waver, promising to honor and cherish, to stand beside through whatever came. And Ruthie answered with her own promises, meaning every word, binding herself to this man and this life with full knowledge of the costs and the gifts. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Wade cupped her face in both hands and kissed her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was exactly where she belonged. The guests applauded, and someone, probably the storekeeper's wife, was crying happy tears. They signed the certificate with witnesses gathered round, making it legal and binding and real. Wade Langston and Ruth McLaren becoming Wade. Wade and Ruth Langston. Two names joined on paper and in life. There was cake and coffee, conversations and congratulations. The neighbors seemed genuinely happy for them, setting aside whatever doubts they might have had in favor of celebration. For a few hours, the parlor filled with laughter and warmth, and the house that had been a tomb became what it was always meant to be, a home where people gathered in joy. But then, as afternoon was fading toward evening, a rider appeared on the horizon, coming fast, coming alone, and Ruthie felt her stomach drop even before she could make out the face. Wade saw him too. He excused himself from conversation, moved to stand on the porch with Ruthie beside him, watching Silas Morton ride up to their wedding celebration like he'd been invited. Morton dismounted, took in the scene with a glance. The guests, the decorations, Wade's formal suit, and Ruthie's wedding dress. His smile was colder than January frost. "Congratulations," he said. "Heard you tied the knot today. Thought I should pay my respects." "You're not welcome here, Silas." Wade's voice was level but hard. "Now that's no way to treat an old friend bearing gifts." Morton pulled an envelope from his coat. "Had my lawyers working all week. Wanted to make sure I gave you this in person." He held out the envelope. Wade didn't take it, so Morton set it on the porch rail. "That's my petition to the court, challenging your administration of your father's trust on grounds of mental incompetency and unfit guardianship. I'll be filing it Monday morning." He looked at Ruthie. "Also included some interesting information about your new bride. Amazing what you can find out when you hire the right investigators. Philadelphia has excellent records, Mrs. Langston." Ruthie felt Wade stiffen beside her, felt the attention of every guest shift to focus on them. But she kept her voice steady. "I've got nothing to be ashamed of, Mr. Morton." "Really?" "Because my sources say different. They say you were accused of providing certain services to pay off your late husband's debts. That you fled Philadelphia one step ahead of scandal and bankruptcy. That your references are non-existent because no one who knew you would vouch for your character." Morton's voice carried clearly, ensuring every guest could hear. "Makes a man wonder what kind of judgment Wade's exercising, marrying a woman like that." The silence that followed was crushing. Ruthie could feel eyes on her, assessing, judging, withdrawing the warm welcome they'd offered just moments before. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but standing on this porch being dissected by gossip and lies. But Wade's hand found hers, gripped tight. "Let me tell you what kind of judgment I'm exercising," Wade said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm marrying a woman who lost everything and refused to compromise her dignity to get it back. A woman who was offered help on degrading terms and chose poverty over surrender. A woman who's worked harder and sacrificed more than any person I've ever met, and who's faced down every hardship with more grace and strength than I showed when I lost my family." He turned to face their guests, still holding Ruthie's hand. "Silas wants you all to question my judgment because I married a woman who was slandered and accused but never broke. Well, I question the judgment of anyone who'd believe rumors over evidence, who'd accept the word of creditors with an agenda over the testimony of a woman who's proven herself through actions, not words." Morton's smile was slipping. "Wade, you're emotional. Damn right I'm emotional. I just married a woman I love, a woman who brought this house back to life when I'd given up on living. And you show up at my wedding to spread poison and lies, thinking you can intimidate us into surrender?" Wade's voice rose. "Let me be clear, Silas. You can file every petition you want. You can dig up every rumor and twist every truth. But Ruthie is my wife now, and this ranch is still locked in trust, and there's not a thing you can do to change either fact." Sheriff Brennan stepped forward. "Morton, I think you've said your piece. Time to leave." "I'm not finished." "Yes, you are." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun belt, casual but clear. "You've delivered your message. Now deliver yourself off this property before I have to make it official." Morton looked around at faces that had gone from uncertain to hostile, at neighbors who'd known Wade for years and were choosing to believe him over a stranger with lawyers. His expression hardened. "Fine. Enjoy your celebration. But come Monday, this gets settled in court, and we'll see who the county believes, a grief-addled rancher and his questionable wife, or a legitimate businessman trying to develop valuable land. He swung onto his horse. One last thing, Wade. When you lose in court, and you will lose, I'm going to own this ranch. Every acre, every building, every fence post. And the first thing I'll do is burn down that house you're so attached to. Let you watch it turn to ash, just like I watched things I cared about burn during the war. That a threat? That's a promise. Morton kicked his horse into a gallop, riding out in a cloud of dust and fury, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Wade stood there, still holding Ruthie's hand, still facing down the assembled guests. Anyone else have questions about my judgment or my wife's character? Now's the time to speak up. The storekeeper's wife stepped forward first. Wade Langston, I've known you since you were in short pants, and I've never seen you look as alive as you do right now. Your new wife's done more for you in a few months than the rest of us managed in 3 years. Far as I'm concerned, she's exactly what you needed. Agreed, said one of the ranchers. And Morton's always been a snake. Wouldn't trust him to tell me the sun was shining while I'm standing in daylight. Others murmured agreement, and Ruthie felt some of the crushing weight lift from her chest. Not everyone believed Morton. Not everyone was willing to condemn her based on rumors. But she also saw hesitation in some faces, doubt in others. The damage was done, even if it wasn't complete. The celebration broke up soon after, guests making their excuses and departing with promises of support that sounded sincere but fragile. By the time the last wagon rolled away, sunset was painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Wade and Ruthie stood alone on the porch of their marriage home. I'm sorry, Ruthie said quietly. Morton came after me to hurt you. He came after both of us because we're standing in his way. That's not your fault. Wade turned to face her. But he meant what he said. He's going to court, and he's going to use every piece of ammunition he can find, including my past, including everything, which means we need to be ready. Wade picked up the envelope Morton had left, broke the seal, scanned the contents. His face went pale. What is it? He's not just challenging my competency. He's claiming the trust itself is invalid, that my father forged documents, that Thomas's birth certificate was falsified to create an heir who didn't actually exist, that the whole thing is a fraud designed to prevent legitimate sale of the property. Wade's hands were shaking. He's attacking Ellen and Thomas, saying my son wasn't real. Ruthie felt rage kindle in her chest. Can he prove any of that? He doesn't have to prove it. He just has to create enough doubt that the court orders an investigation. And once they start digging into birth records, death certificates, my father's estate, even if they find nothing wrong, the process could take months, maybe years. Meanwhile, the ranch sits in legal limbo. I can't sell even if I wanted to, and Morton just waits for me to run out of resources to fight. Then we don't let it get that far. We find proof, absolute, undeniable proof, that the trust is legitimate, that Thomas was real, that everything your father did was legal and proper. Wade looked at her with something between hope and despair. How? The lawyer who drew up the trust is dead. My father's dead. The doctor who delivered Thomas is dead. Everyone who could testify to the truth is gone. Not everyone. Ruthie's mind was racing, sorting through possibilities. What about Ellen's family? Did she have relatives who knew Thomas? Her mother died before we married. She had a sister, but they were estranged, some argument over inheritance I never fully understood. Haven't heard from her since the funeral. Do you know where she is? Last I heard, living in Dallas. Why? Because she's family. She knew Thomas, knew Ellen, can testify that your son was real and your marriage was legitimate. Morton can't dismiss bloodkin as easily as he can dismiss old records. Wade's expression shifted, hope beginning to penetrate despair. Sarah. Ellen's sister's name was Sarah, but Ruthie. Even if we could find her, even if she'd be willing to help, she and Ellen parted badly. She might not want anything to do with me. Only one way to find out. We go to Dallas, we find her, we ask. Ruthie took his hands. Wade, we're not going down without a fight. Morton wants to destroy everything you've built, everything your family created. We don't let him. We find the evidence. We prove him wrong. And we show him that we're stronger together than he ever expected. Wade pulled her close, held her tight. How did I get so lucky? Finding you, I mean. Not luck. Just two broken people stumbling into each other at the right time. She pulled back, looked up at him. Now come on, we've got a wedding night to finish, and tomorrow we start fighting back. They went inside together, leaving the porch where Morton had delivered his threats, moving into the house that had survived fire and grief and was learning to hold joy again. Upstairs, in Wade's room, their room now, they stood facing each other in lamplight that painted everything gold. I meant what I said, Wade told her softly, about loving you, about choosing you. This isn't strategy anymore. It never was. Not really. Ruthie reached up, touched his face. I love you too, Wade Langston. And tomorrow we're going to prove to Silas Morton and everyone else that love is stronger than greed. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and they came together as husband and wife in truth, not just legality. And for those hours, the war waiting outside didn't matter. Only this mattered. Two people choosing each other, defending each other, building something worth fighting for in the ashes of what they'd lost. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The ranch settled into night sounds, cattle lowing, wind in grass, the creek murmuring its eternal conversation with stone. And in Dallas, 200 miles east, a woman named Sarah was going about her evening, unaware that by morning her estranged brother-in-law would be on his way to ask for help that might save or damn everything Ellen had loved. The war was coming, but Wade and Ruthie Langston were ready to fight it together, with love as their weapon and truth as their shield. And that, they both knew, was the only way battles worth winning were ever won. They left for Dallas before dawn the next morning, taking only what they could carry and leaving Sheriff Brennan with instructions to watch the ranch. The journey east took 3 days by stage, through country that shifted from open grassland to rolling hills to the outskirts of a city that sprawled larger and louder than anything Ruthie had seen since leaving Philadelphia. Wade had the address from an old letter, crumpled and read so many times the creases had worn thin. Sarah Mitchell, Ellen's younger sister, living in a boarding house on the east side of town near the railroad yards. Whether she'd still be there after 3 years was anyone's guess, but it was the only thread they had to pull. The boarding house turned out to be a narrow 3-story building squeezed between a dry goods store and a saloon, its paint peeling and its steps sagging with age. Wade stood looking up at it with an expression Ruthie couldn't quite read. Last time I saw Sarah was at the funeral, he said quietly. She came, stood at the back during the service, left before I could talk to her. Didn't even come to the house after, just disappeared. Why did they fight? You said it was about inheritance. Ellen's mother left everything to Ellen because Sarah had married against her wishes. Some gambler who took her money and left her with nothing. The old woman thought she was teaching Sarah a lesson about consequences. Instead, she drove a wedge between the sisters that never healed. Wade's jaw tightened. Ellen tried to share, sent Sarah money, but Sarah was too proud to take it. Said she didn't want charity from the sister who'd stolen her birthright. That's going to make asking for help complicated. Everything about this is complicated. Wade squared his shoulders. But we're here now. Might as well see it through. The landlady who answered their knock was a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. Help you. We're looking for Sarah Mitchell, Wade said. Understand she lives here? Who's asking? Wade Langston. I'm her brother-in-law. This is my wife, Ruth. The landlady's expression shifted slightly. Sarah's mentioned you, not fondly, I'll warn you. She's up in 3B, but she works days at the shirt factory. Won't be back till after 6. We'll wait. They found a cafe across the street where they could watch the boarding house, nursing coffee that tasted like it had been made from burnt rope. The hours crawled past, Wade getting more tense as the sun tracked across the sky, Ruthie trying to plan what they'd say and coming up empty. Finally, as evening was settling over the city, they saw her, a woman in a plain work dress, walking with the exhausted gait of someone who'd been on her feet all day, climbing the boarding house steps with shoulders bent under invisible weight. That's Sarah, Wade said, standing abruptly. Come on. They crossed the street, climbed those same sagging steps, and knocked on 3B before Wade could lose his nerve. Footsteps approached, the door opened, and Sarah Mitchell stood there looking at her dead sister's husband with eyes that held old grief and older anger. She was smaller than Ellen had been in the photographs Ruthie had seen, with dark hair pulled severely back and hands that showed the rough wear of factory work. But she had Ellen's eyes, Ellen's cheekbones, Ellen's way of holding her chin up when facing something difficult. "Wade." Her voice was flat. "What are you doing here?" "I need your help." "That's rich, coming from you. Last time we spoke, you made it pretty clear you didn't need anything from me." "Sarah, please. Can we come in? Just for a few minutes." She looked past Wade to Ruthie, taking in the wedding ring, the way they stood close together. "This your new wife?" "That was fast. Ellen's not even cold in her grave 3 years, and you've already replaced her." Wade flinched but held his ground. "This is Ruth, and yes, we married this week, but that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" "Because if you came to invite me to some belated wedding celebration, you can save your breath." "I came because Silas Morton is trying to steal the ranch. He's claiming the trust my father set up is fraudulent, that Thomas wasn't real, that I forged documents to create an heir that didn't exist. And the only way I can prove him wrong is if someone who knew Thomas, who knew Ellen, who can testify to the truth, steps forward." Wade's voice cracked. "You're the only family left, Sarah. You're the only one who can help." Sarah's expression didn't soften, but something flickered in her eyes. "Silas Morton? From the war. You know him?" "Know of him. He came around here about 6 months ago, asking questions about Ellen, about your marriage, about Thomas. Offered me money to say I'd never met your son, that Ellen had confided she'd married you already pregnant with another man's child." Sarah's mouth twisted. "I threw him out. Didn't matter what I thought of you. I wasn't going to spit on my sister's memory for that snake's money." Ruthie felt something loosen in her chest. "You refused him." "Of course I refused him. Whatever else happened between Ellen and me, she was my sister, and Thomas was my nephew, even if I only met him twice before he died." Sarah looked at Wade. "But that doesn't mean I'm willing to help you now. You made your choices, Wade. You picked Ellen over family peace. You built your empire while I worked in factories, and you didn't even have the decency to let me grieve with you when they died." "I should have reached out," Wade said quietly. "After the funeral, after everything. I was drowning in grief, and I let that be an excuse to shut everyone out, including you. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change the past." "No, it doesn't. But maybe it can change what happens next." Wade pulled out the legal papers Morton had served. "This is what he's filing. Claims that your sister married me to cover up an affair, that Thomas was illegitimate, that the whole trust was created through fraud and deception. He's not just trying to take the ranch, Sarah. He's trying to destroy Ellen's memory, turn her into something she wasn't." Sarah took the papers with shaking hands, read through them, and Ruthie watched color drain from her face. "He's saying Ellen was unfaithful, that she was a liar and a fraud." That's exactly what he's saying. "And unless someone stands up in court and testifies to the truth, that Ellen was faithful, that Thomas was mine, that our marriage was real and honest, he might convince a judge to believe it." "Why would a judge believe this garbage?" "Because Morton has money and lawyers and connections, and all I have is 3-year-old memories and love for people who aren't here to defend themselves." Wade's voice was raw. "I need you, Sarah. Not for me, but for Ellen. Help me protect what she built, what she loved, what she died believing would be safe for our son." Sarah stood there in her small room with its single window and threadbare furniture, holding papers that accused her sister of sins she'd never committed, and Ruthie saw the war happening inside her, pride versus duty, anger versus love, the desire to hurt Wade warring against the need to protect Ellen's memory. "If I do this," Sarah said finally, "it's not for you. It's for Ellen and Thomas. They deserve better than to have their names dragged through mud by a man who never knew them. That's all I'm asking. And when it's over, when the court case is settled and Morton's dealt with, you going to disappear back into your grief and forget I exist?" Wade looked at Ruthie, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded, giving permission for something she hoped they could deliver. "No," Wade said. "When it's over, your family. You'll always be welcome at Blackbriar Ranch. Always have a place there if you need it. I can't give you back the years we lost, Sarah, but I can give you a future where you're not forgotten." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Fine, I'll testify. When do you need me in Cedar Falls?" Court date is 2 weeks from Monday. Can you get time off work? I'll manage. She set the papers down, scrubbed at her face. You should know, when Morton came asking questions, he wasn't alone. Had another man with him, lawyer type, carrying a briefcase full of documents. They were building a case even then, 6 months ago. This isn't impulsive, Wade. He's been planning this for a long time. What kind of documents? Land surveys, property deeds, financial records? Looked like they were mapping out every ranch within 20 miles of yours. Sarah's expression darkened. This isn't just about your land, it's bigger. He's trying to consolidate the whole region under his control. Ruthie and Wade exchanged glances. If Morton was playing a longer game than they'd realized, they needed more than just Sarah's testimony. They needed to understand his whole strategy, find the weak point, exploit it before he could crush them. Sarah, Ruthie said carefully, when Morton offered you money to lie about Thomas, did he say why it mattered so much? Why go to all this trouble? Said something about water rights and railroad access, that your ranch sits on the most valuable land in the county, and once he controlled it, he'd control everything else. Sarah looked between them. You two realize what you're up against, right? This isn't about one ranch or one grudge. Morton's trying to build an empire, and you're the last obstacle in his way. Then we better be a damn good obstacle, Wade said grimly. They left Sarah with promises to send details about the court date and traveled back to Cedar Falls with new knowledge and old fears. The stage ride gave them time to think, to plan, to understand that Sarah's testimony alone might not be enough. We need something else, Ruthie said as the familiar landscape of home came into view. Something that proves Morton's playing dirty, that his whole case is built on manipulation rather than law. Like what? Like evidence that he's been falsifying property records or bribing officials or… She stopped. Wade, what happened to the Henderson property after Morton bought it? Is the family still there? Last I heard, they were forced out. House was torn down, land was being prepared for something. Why? Because if Morton cleared them out despite the trust restrictions, someone had to authorize that. And if we can prove the authorization was improper, we can show a pattern of corruption that undermines his whole case. Wade's eyes lit with understanding. We go back to the county recorder, pull every transaction Morton's been involved with, look for irregularities. Exactly. They arrived in Cedar Falls to find the town buzzing with news. Morton had been making his rounds, spreading his version of events, painting Wade as mentally unstable, and Ruthie as an opportunistic woman who'd trapped a grief-addled man into marriage. The whispers followed them through the streets, and Ruthie felt the weight of judgment pressing down from every direction. But there were also unexpected allies. The storekeeper's wife stopped them on the street to press a basket of food into Ruthie's hands. Don't you listen to that Morton's poison, she said firmly. Anyone with eyes can see you and Wade are good for each other. Sheriff Brennan caught up with them outside the courthouse. Had some trouble while you were gone. Someone tried to start a fire in your north barn. We caught them before it got going, but… He hesitated. It was one of Morton's ranch hands. Had orders, he said, to create pressure. I've got him in a cell, but without Morton directly connected, there's not much I can charge him with. Let me talk to him, Wade said. Wade, just talk, Tom. That's all. The ranch hand was a kid, really, maybe 20, scared and trying to hide it behind bravado. He looked up when Wade entered the cell area, and Ruthie saw him swallow hard. Mr. Langston, I wasn't trying to hurt nobody. Just burned down my barn with my horses inside. Wade's voice was deceptively calm. That about right? Morton said you wouldn't be there, said it was just to send a message. What message? That he's willing to destroy property and risk lives to get what he wants? The kid looked at his boots. Said you were standing in the way of progress, that once you were gone, the whole county would benefit from proper development. Development. Wade laughed without humor. That what he calls it? Burning out families and stealing land? It ain't stealing if he's buying it legal. Nothing Morton does is legal. He manipulates records, bribes officials, intimidates anyone who won't sell, and you're helping him. Wade leaned closer. Let me tell you what happens next. You're going to sit in this cell while the sheriff decides what to charge you with. Morton's going to abandon you because that's what he does to people who get caught. And you're going to have to decide whether loyalty to a man who doesn't care about you is worth ruining your life. The kid's bravado crumbled. He said he'd take care of me, said I'd have a job for life if I did what he wanted. He lied, same way he lies to everyone. Wade straightened. But here's what I'm offering. You testify against Morton in court. Tell the truth about who ordered you to set that fire, what other pressure he's been applying, and I'll speak on your behalf at sentencing. Can't promise you'll avoid consequences, but I can promise you a future that doesn't involve being Morton's disposable tool. Why would you do that? Because I remember being young and desperate and making bad choices. Someone gave me a second chance. I'm passing it forward. The kid looked at Wade for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll testify. Tell them everything I know about Morton's operations. They left the jail with one more piece of evidence, one more witness who could expose Morton's tactics. But as they walked back to where they'd left the wagon, Ruthie saw riders approaching, 5 of them, moving with purpose, and her blood went cold when she recognized the man in front. Morton reined up in the middle of the street, forcing Wade and Ruthie to stop. Heard you were back from Dallas. Have a nice trip? What do you want, Silas? Just checking on my future property. See how it's holding up under all this stress. Morton's smile was sharp. Also wanted to give you fair warning. I'm not waiting for the court date. I'm filing for an emergency injunction tomorrow, claiming you're actively damaging the property value through neglect and poor management. Judge grants it, and you're off that ranch by the end of the week. Wade's hands clenched into fists. You can't do that. Watch me. I've got affidavits from neighbors claiming you've let the place fall into disrepair, that you're not mentally fit to maintain valuable land. Court'll appoint a temporary administrator, probably someone I recommend, and you'll be out before you can mount a defense. Those neighbors are lying. Prove it. Oh, wait. You can't because you've spent 3 years pushing everyone away and making enemies. Morton leaned forward in his saddle. Face it, Wade. You've already lost. This is just me being merciful, giving you a chance to walk away with dignity instead of being dragged out by the sheriff. Ruthie stepped forward before Wade could respond. You're making a mistake, Mr. Morton. Am I? Please, enlighten me, Mrs. Langston. You think you've covered your tracks, bought all the right people, manipulated all the right records, but you've gotten sloppy. We've been digging, and we've found irregularities in half your property acquisitions. Trust violations, fraudulent authorizations, bribes paid to county officials. She was bluffing, stretching what they actually knew, but Morton's face went carefully blank. You're not just facing one ranch owner and his wife. You're facing an investigation that could unravel everything you've built. You're fishing. Are we? Then explain the Henderson property. Explain why you were able to develop land that was supposed to be held in trust for 7 years. Explain how you got authorization to demolish a house that should have been protected under a state law. Morton's eyes narrowed. You can't prove any of that. We don't have to prove all of it. Just enough to create reasonable doubt about your motives and methods. Just enough to make the judge wonder if maybe you're not the legitimate businessman you claim to be. Ruthie held his gaze. You wanted a war, Mr. Morton. You've got one. For the first time, Morton looked uncertain. He glanced at his men, back at Ruthie and Wade, and she could almost see him recalculating odds and strategies. This isn't over, he said finally. No, Wade agreed. It's not. But it's not going to end the way you planned either. Morton wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following, leaving Wade and Ruthie standing in the street with the whole town watching. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. They spent long hours at the courthouse going through records, documenting every questionable transaction Morton had made. They interviewed neighbors, gathering statements that contradicted Morton's claims of neglect. They brought Sarah to town early, got her situated with the storekeeper's family, let people see that Wade had family support. And through it all, Ruthie and Wade worked together with the seamless coordination of people who'd learned to trust each other completely. Where Wade was too angry to see clearly, Ruthie provided calm analysis. Where Ruthie was too uncertain of local politics, Wade provided context and connections. They were stronger together than either had been alone, and everyone who saw them could tell. The night before the court date, they lay in bed listening to the house settle around them, and Wade pulled Ruthie close. Win or lose tomorrow, I want you to know something, he said quietly. You've given me back my life. No matter what happens with the ranch, with Morton, with any of it, I'll always be grateful I found you. We found each other, Ruthie corrected, and we're going to win. Because we have truth on our side and love, and that counts for something. Does it? Sometimes I wonder if truth and love are enough against money and corruption. They have to be. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Wade kissed her forehead. You're right. They have to be enough. The courthouse was packed when they arrived the next morning. Seemed like half the county had turned out to watch the Langston case, drawn by gossip and spectacle and the chance to see Silas Morton finally challenged. Wade and Ruthie sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, a young man from Dallas who specialized in trust law and had taken their case for a fraction of his usual fee because, he said, he hated seeing bullies win. Morton sat across the aisle with 3 lawyers, all of them looking expensive and confident. But Ruthie noticed Morton himself seemed tense. His usual smooth composure cracked just slightly around the edges. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Hartwell was an old man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness that had survived 40 years on the bench. He looked over the assembled crowd, then focused on the lawyers. Gentlemen, this is a courtroom, not a circus. I'm here to rule on facts and law, not gossip and speculation. You'll present your evidence clearly and concisely, and we'll proceed in an orderly fashion. Understood? Both sides agreed, and the trial began. Morton's lawyers went first, laying out their case with practiced efficiency. They presented affidavits claiming Wade was mentally unstable, unable to properly manage the ranch, making poor decisions including marrying a woman of questionable character. They questioned the validity of the trust, suggested documents had been forged or manipulated, implied Thomas might not have been Wade's biological son. It was brutal, calculated, designed to destroy Wade's credibility and Ellen's memory in one efficient attack. Ruthie felt Wade shaking with rage beside her, but he held himself together, letting their lawyer handle the objections. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer called Sarah Mitchell to the stand first. She walked up with her head high, wearing a simple dress but carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had nothing to hide. Miss Mitchell, how did you know Thomas Langston? He was my nephew, my sister Ellen's son. And you're certain Wade Langston was the father? Absolutely certain. Ellen loved Wade deeply. She'd never have betrayed him, and anyone who suggests otherwise is either a liar or a fool. Morton's lawyer stood. Objection. The witness is hardly impartial. The witness is family, Judge Hartwell interrupted, which makes her testimony more valuable, not less. Continue, Miss Mitchell. Sarah described meeting Thomas, holding him as a baby, watching him grow. She produced photographs Ellen had sent her, pictures of Wade with his son, the family together, dated and documented. She testified about Ellen's character, her faithfulness, her joy in her marriage. Miss Mitchell, their lawyer asked gently, did Silas Morton approach you recently with an offer? He did. Offered me $500 to testify that I'd never met Thomas, that Ellen had confided she was pregnant before marrying Wade. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Morton's face went rigid. And what did you tell him? I told him to get out of my house before I threw him out. I don't lie for money, especially not about my sister. They called the ranch hand next, who testified about Morton's orders to set fires and create pressure. Then neighbors who contradicted the claims of neglect, who described seeing Wade slowly healing with Ruthie's help, who spoke to the ranch being better maintained now than it had been in years. Finally, their lawyer presented documents, the original trust, properly filed and notarized, with signatures verified by handwriting experts. Thomas's birth certificate, issued by the county the day he was born. Ellen's death certificate. Wade's marriage certificate. Every piece of paper that proved the family was real and legitimate. Your Honor, their lawyer said, Mr. Morton's case rests on innuendo and accusation. Ours rests on documented fact. The trust is valid. The family was real. And Mr. Langston's judgment in marrying Mrs. Langston shows wisdom, not incompetence. He chose a partner who's helped him heal and better manage his property. Morton's lawyers tried to recover, calling witnesses who claimed Wade was unstable, but under cross-examination, their stories fell apart. One admitted Morton had paid him to testify. Another contradicted himself 3 times. By afternoon, Morton's case was crumbling. Then their lawyer played his final card. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence documentation of Mr. Morton's property acquisitions over the past 2 years, specifically highlighting irregularities in how he obtained properties supposedly held in trust or under estate restrictions. He presented the records they'd gathered, page after page of questionable transactions, authorizations that should never have been granted, properties developed in violation of trust terms. It painted a picture of systematic corruption, of a man who bent and broke laws to get what he wanted. Morton's lawyers objected strenuously, but Judge Hartwell allowed the evidence, studying it with growing interest. "Mr. Morton," the judge said finally, "I'm troubled by what I'm seeing here. These documents suggest a pattern of manipulation that goes far beyond this single case. I'm going to order a full investigation into your business practices, and I'm denying your petition to invalidate the Langston Trust." The courtroom erupted. Morton shot to his feet, his composure finally shattered. "You can't. This is a travesty. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent while I'm ruling," Hartwell snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Morton." Morton sat, but his eyes were murderous. "The Langston Trust is valid and binding," the judge continued. "Wade Langston's competency as administrator is affirmed. His marriage to Ruth Langston is legitimate and shows sound judgment, not incompetence. And I'm warning you, Mr. Morton, if I find evidence you've been manipulating county records or bribing officials, you'll face criminal charges in addition to civil penalties. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and Ruthie felt Wade's arms around her, heard Sarah's laugh of relief, saw their lawyer grinning with victory. They'd won. Against money and corruption and lies, they'd won with truth and family and love. But as they were leaving the courthouse, Morton cornered them on the steps. His smooth mask was gone, replaced by raw fury. "This isn't over, Wade. You think one court ruling changes anything? I'll destroy you. I'll burn that ranch to the ground. I'll make you wish you'd sold when you had the chance." "Try it," Wade said calmly. "And I'll have you arrested for arson, intimidation, and every other crime you've committed. You're done, Silas. The county knows what you are now. Your empire's crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Morton's hand moved toward his coat, and Ruthie saw Sheriff Brennan step forward, gun already drawn. "Don't even think about it, Morton. You're already facing investigation. Don't add assault to the charges." Morton looked around at faces that had gone from uncertain to hostile, at people who'd once been afraid of him now standing firm behind the Langstons. Slowly, his hand dropped. "This isn't over," he repeated, but the words sounded hollow. "Yes," Ruthie said quietly. "It is. You've lost, Mr. Morton. Go find somewhere else to build your empire. This land's not for sale." Morton stared at her with hatred that burned like acid, then turned and walked away. His lawyers followed, then his ranch hands, until he was riding out of Cedar Falls alone, defeated, stripped of the power he'd thought was absolute. The crowd that had watched in silence erupted in cheers. People surrounded Wade and Ruthie, congratulating them, apologizing for doubting them, welcoming them as the county's newest power couple. Sarah stood nearby, crying and laughing at the same time, and when Ruthie pulled her into a hug, she felt the older woman cling tight. "Thank you," Ruthie whispered, "for standing up for Ellen and Thomas." "Thank you for reminding me what family means," Sarah whispered back. They celebrated that night at the ranch, with neighbors and friends filling the house with laughter and music. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else brought whiskey, and the parlor that had once been a tomb became what it was always meant to be. A space where life happened, where joy lived, where people gathered to mark moments that mattered. Wade and Ruthie slipped away as the party was winding down, walking out to the porch, where this had all started months ago with a job nobody wanted and a woman with nowhere left to run. "We did it," Wade said wonderingly. "We actually did it. We did. And now we get to decide what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Ruthie looked out over land that had become home, at a house that had become a haven, at a future that stretched wide and bright ahead of them. "I want to live here. Really live, not just survive. I want to help you build this ranch into something Thomas and Ellen would be proud of. I want to bring Sarah here if she'll come, give her the family she lost. I want to wake up every morning next to you and know that we chose this, chose each other, chose love over fear." Wade pulled her close, kissed her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was exactly where she belonged. "Then that's what we'll do, together." In the weeks that followed, Morton left Cedar Falls quietly, his land empire collapsing under investigation, his corruption exposed, his threats proven empty. The properties he'd accumulated were redistributed, sold to legitimate buyers, returned to families who'd been forced out. The county recovered from his influence slowly but surely, and the Langstons became symbols of what happened when good people refused to surrender to bullies. Sarah came to live at the ranch that fall, taking over Ellen's old sewing room and transforming it into a space that honored her sister's memory while creating something new. She and Wade slowly rebuilt the relationship the sisters' argument had destroyed, finding peace in shared stories and shared grief. The nursery stayed unlocked, and sometimes Wade would go in there to carve new wooden horses, adding them to the collection his son had loved. He never pretended Thomas hadn't existed, never locked away the love, but he learned to hold it alongside new joy instead of letting it consume him. And Ruthie settled into being Mrs. Langston with the same determination she'd brought to being his housekeeper. She planted gardens, raised chickens, helped with cattle drives, and slowly transformed the mansion from a monument to grief into a working ranch house full of life and purpose. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Wade found her in the kitchen making bread while Sarah cleaned vegetables at the sink. The two women were laughing about something, comfortable in each other's company, and the sight stopped him in his tracks. "What?" Ruthie asked, seeing his expression. "Just thinking about how different this place looks now. How different I feel. Different good or different bad? Different alive." He crossed to her, flour dusting her hands, love shining in her eyes. "I spent 3 years being dead while I was breathing. You taught me how to live again." "We taught each other," Ruthie corrected, the way she always did. "Neither of us could have done this alone." Sarah looked between them, smiling. "Ellen would have liked you, Ruthie. She always said Wade needed someone strong enough to stand up to him when he was being stubborn." "Then I'm glad I'm stubborn too," Ruthie said, kissing Wade's cheek and going back to her bread. As the sun set over Blackbriar Ranch that evening, painting the land in shades of gold and amber, 3 people sat down to supper together. Family, not by blood, but by choice. Bound together by loss and love, and the fierce determination to protect what mattered. Outside, the sign that bore the Langston name gleamed in fading light. The ranch that had almost been lost to greed and corruption stood firm, protected by trust and defended by truth. And inside the house that had once felt like a grave, laughter rang out as Wade told stories about Thomas that made Sarah cry and Ruthie smile, sharing memory instead of sealing it away. This was healing, not forgetting, not replacing, but making space for joy alongside grief, for new love alongside old, for the living to honor the dead by choosing to truly live. And when Wade and Ruthie climbed the stairs to their room that night, passing the unlocked nursery where moonlight fell across small wooden horses, they knew they'd found something rare and precious, a second chance at happiness, built on ashes and watered with tears, growing strong in soil enriched by everything they'd survived. The war was over. The battle was won. And the rest of their story was waiting to be written. One day, one choice, one act of love at a time. In Cedar Falls, people would talk about the Langstons for years to come, about how Wade had been pulled back from the edge of grief by a woman with nothing to lose and everything to give, about how they'd stood together against corruption and won with nothing but truth and courage, about how the ranch that had seemed cursed became blessed again, not because the past was forgotten, but because the future was embraced with open hearts and joined hands. And on quiet evenings, when wind moved through grass like whispered conversations and stars burned bright overhead, you could hear music drifting from the ranch house. Sometimes a piano playing old lullabies, sometimes a fiddle at a gathering, sometimes just the sound of people who loved each other sharing the kind of ordinary moments that make life extraordinary. This was their ending, which was really their beginning. 2 broken people who'd found each other at the end of roads and built something beautiful from broken pieces. A family forged not by blood, but by choice. A home restored not by forgetting loss, but by choosing, despite everything, to hope again. And that, in the end, was how you healed from grief too heavy to carry alone. You found someone willing to help you carry it, someone who saw your broken places and loved you anyway, someone who believed that tomorrow could be better than yesterday if you were brave enough to build it together. The house that grief built became the house that love restored. And Wade and Ruth Langston lived there for the rest of their days, defending what mattered, honoring what was lost, and creating new stories worth telling, stories of courage and redemption, of second chances and chosen family, of love that was stronger than fear and hope that refused to die. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.